So who,
We're ready. Mayor?
He's sick? You're sick? The flu?
hello, everyone. So this is a joint workshop with P and Z and the commission with public involvement as well. So when we get to that part, I'll perhaps have some other comments. But now, let's do the roll call.
Roll call for town commissioners. Commissioner Bessler?
Here.
Mayor Cos?
Here.
Commissioner DeHasseth?
Present.
Commissioner Herbert?
Here.
Vice Mayor Magruder?
Here.
Roll call for Planning and Zoning Commission. Member Rick Carey?
Here.
Member David Hutchins?
Here.
Member Penny Kaczynski? Vice Chair Mark Marsh?
Here.
Alternate Member Neil Hannigan?
Here.
Alternate Member James Lemming.
Okay, let's stand for the pledge. Okay, are there any additions, deletions, or modifications to the agenda?
Yes, Mayor. I would like to move item number 5 regarding the beach erosion to be the beginning of the meeting directly after public comment. And I would also like to add a section right before public comment for the commission to discuss meeting decorum and if the public comment will be allowed during the workshop portion of the meeting.
Right, we'll address
Okay.
that. I also would like to move number 3 to number 1. In other words, the synthetic turf up to the first joint workshop discussion item. Anybody have a problem with that?
I thought we were gonna do the sand first. The emergency resolution.
Yeah, but under joint workshop items.
Why?
Because I believe there's some people here that are trying to catch flights, et cetera, that would like to be involved in it. I don't see the big deal, Susan Franklin.
No, I'm just asking why.
Any consensus?
I'm fine with it.
Don?
I'm okay.
Okay. You're okay?
Nope.
All right, so we gotta have a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Well, what was the motion? I guess maybe let
Yeah,
Tracy.
let me reiterate.
Yeah.
So we're going to be moving item number 5 to the beginning of the meeting directly after public comment, and then adding a section to discuss decorum, meeting decorum, right before public comment, and then moving item number 3 to the first item of the joint workshop.
Do we hear a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second? I'll second it. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
So I think it was 3 to 2.
Leave it the way it is, and that way everybody gets to participate and hear what else is going on, because once we do the turf, half the audience is gonna leave.
Well, I'm doing it for the audience.
Yeah.
But I think it just,
We would like their input on everything else also.
Yeah.
we just voted 3 to 2. It's a heck of a way to start off our meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Per the vote we just had, Tracy, item number 5 is now number 1. Carla?
Well, I think, were you going to?
Right, so the next item on the agenda now is to discuss meeting decorum.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
Or were you going to allow, I guess, was that before
Right.
public comment?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So we want to discuss meeting decorum. Usually during a workshop session, there is no public comment at that point. Public comment is taken before the workshop session. So the commission will need to decide how you want to handle public comment for this meeting.
So I got called by a couple of residents on this, and this is what I would suggest. Since we have, let's say, 3 items, right? Sheds, signs, turf. We have public comment before each of the individual items. Then we have a PZ commissioner discussion. And then at the end, it would be open briefly in case something is triggered that the public would like to comment on. Does that sound like a solution?
Yeah, I think that's okay, but I think if, we shouldn't have just triggered on something we've already talked about, just hear
Good
it
point.
over and over again, you know what I mean?
Yeah, in other words, if the
It's gotta
point
be
has been
something
made.
new or
there's no-
something we said wrong, you know, we got some facts wrong.
Is that okay with the commissioners?
I assume that the workshop was mostly going to be between P and Z and us with a little public comment in the beginning so that we could have the discussion that we never get to have. Is that not a normal way to do the workshop here versus having public discussion? I mean, back and forth all the time, aren't we trying to avoid
Well,
that because
No,
it's supposed to be us?
it's not public discussion back and forth all the time. It's before each item, the public gets to present what they'd like to present publicly versus presenting it all way up front in the meeting. That's all.
I just think we've got, these are three really big items, and each one of these items, we could probably have a complete workshop on
Yep.
in and of itself, and I'm just worried that if we get too bogged down, that, that we're just not gonna accomplish what we hope to do, which is get some direction on, you know, and that's why we would like to have everybody remain for the entire meeting, because as long as we've got a lot of people here, I'd love to have everybody's input on all of this, not just one area
Right.
of it, so. I would be
But-
in favor of keeping it to 15 minutes at the very beginning of the meeting, and then, to Susan's point, letting us as two bodies get going and do what we need to do.
15 minutes before each item, or?
Yeah. During public comment, and then we get going.
Which, my feeling is, when you get to the individual items, the public should have an opportunity to speak to that individual item versus having
They
a
do.
large block in the beginning of the meeting where we're gonna be hearing about all three different ordinances.
I could look for something along that line, but where the public speaks before the items, but not after. Because it really,
Okay.
you know, we're not making any big decisions
So-
here, we're basically having a dialogue, correct?
Right.
So I don't think we need to have,
Okay,
if something triggers.
So let's just append to that, and then I'd agree with it, that whatever is decided here is then presented at the March meeting. You know, Tracy would present the findings or the directions from this meeting at the town meeting, which more people will attend because it starts at 6.
Some of these may need to go back to P and Z before they go to the commission, though.
But that would be announced at the March meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, can I
Well, it will
just-
be announced at this meeting where they're
Right.
going.
yeah.
Right.
Right, but one of the things that we kind of disagreed on the last time was that the artificial turf, we wanted to kind of go back to P and Z and start over, a couple
To
of us.
talk with them,
But
right.
the other ones wanted to go to the second reading. So what I would like to just have, because this artificial turf, I've got one major issue with it that I'd like to get cleared up, that if this artificial turf goes to a second reading on March meeting, so we've got like 1 week to decide on this, that I get to ask the audience a question. Or I get to make a statement to get from the audience,
At this meeting or the March 2nd?
this meeting, because I don't want to wait again to March 2nd to make my decision.
You want to have a dialogue with the audience?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question to get clarification.
It's offered, but is that an issue? It's-
Well, I mean, it's
Right.
what you all agree on as far as
Right,
allowing
right.
public comment or not allowing public comment and how much public comment you want to allow.
Yeah, I mean, I only have one issue that I see that I'm going to have going through this meeting.
And would that be, say, I'll just give you an example, you have your question and you have 5 people wanting to make an answer at, 2-3 minutes apiece, then we're back to kind of having our after conversation.
Okay, I mean,
I
all
mean,
I'm
yeah, I'm just
saying
throwing
is,
it out there. No, I get,
yeah,
I
if you
understand.
want an honest decision from me, I need to
Right.
get a clarification. If I don't get a clarification, I'm going to vote a different way, I think, because, well, whatever. I don't want to kind of say stuff ahead of time because I'm still on the fence on that issue.
Right, I understand. Could none of those questions could be answered by P and Z?
Oh, they might be.
Who we're
They
here to
might be.
talk
I
to?
don't know. I'm just
Or
saying,
staff.
can I get
Or
enough?
staff.
Yes,
God knows
yes.
we've got enough information.
So
right now.
Phil's simply asking if he can ask a question at the conclusion of the artificial term.
And a question that anybody can answer. That's
He doesn't know.
right,
Well,
that
right.
anybody
I
can-
don't,
that's-
anybody can answer it, but what's gonna
Right, but
happen is
anybody can
half are
try
gonna
to
say
answer.
one way and half are gonna say the other way,
Right.
and that's my problem.
Okay. Don, got any problems? Anything? What do you think?
As long as we limit it to a certain time certain, because I think that's what we're all trying to get
And
back
use the
to,
gavel,
is
yeah.
if we use this entire workshop for something and rehash everything, in the direction that it was done before, number one, it's gonna continue to be divisive in the town, which is reprehensible. And number two, I don't think we're gonna get to the other major issues that we really want people's input on. I mean, they've been floating out there forever. I'd like to tackle them.
So we
Can
keep our answers,
If we did the public comment before each one, could we have no more than 2 people and limit those 2 people to 3 minutes each?
No.
On each
Why would
item?
you,
Can't do
Yeah, you're
that?
the public's here. Why
I
would you
know they
limit
are,
the
but I
public?
mean, there's some people here that have come prepared and primarily on the artificial turf. I'm not interested in sitting here all evening listening to the arguments on the artificial turf that we've already had. But there may be someone that would like to speak on the sheds. There may be somebody that wants to speak on one of the other issues that we have.
Yeah.
That could
Right.
be
But they would
beneficial.
before the item.
Right.
They could, but I don't want it to, that's why I'm saying no more than 2 people, or no more than 3 minutes, or
but
however
we
you
do
want
have
to
a
structure
time,
it.
don't we have a time for public comment? 2 minutes,
Well, you
correct?
do for the general.
Right, so
public
can we
comment.
adopt that 2 minutes
Yes.
as well? And I don't think that's a big problem to let a commissioner ask a question and see who might have an answer,
That's
right?
big of you.
Well, do you?
No, think what you just said, though.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, no, you-
But we usually don't. We usually don't throw questions out there. So I think that's not a problem to do that today.
Okay, we agreed on this then?
What did we agree on?
What did we agree on, right?
And on public comment before each item.
Right?
And
2 minutes.
no, 2 minutes per person limit, and no public comment after the discussion, except Phil wants to ask a question.
Well, I would say any commissioner, I mean,
Or any
just something might come up, but
Okay.
I'll take it. I just want one question.
And then we present the notes, or whatever you want to call it, at the March 2nd meeting, of what we, directions we've given, decisions made.
The only thing that I'd like to add to that is, Bill, for the questions that you're seeking, I would ask that you address staff and/or our experts in P and Z first, to see if you can get your answer. Because if not, we're gonna have just a complete pause, rewind, replay.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay.
Okay, so we're kind of in consensus on this?
I don't think
Great.
so.
So I guess technically we have to open with public comment, but if you're going to comment on one of the 3 items, don't come up and comment,
Right.
right? Anybody want to comment? No. The what?
Yes,
Penny?
yes,
Yes. That's the next
Yeah.
item.
right.
So Carla, resolution number 2020-05.
A resolution of the Town Commission of the Town of Ocean Ridge, Florida, declaring a state of local emergency, providing for an effective date.
Tracy, you want to?
Yes. As you know, the town is experiencing significant beach erosion due to past storms and continuing severe beach conditions to the point where several homes are in jeopardy. The town engineer conducted field observations for properties in the erosion area, and it is her professional opinion that the town should declare an emergency at this time for the area from 6285 North Ocean Boulevard and south along to 6029 Old Ocean Boulevard. In order for the affected homeowners to obtain emergency permits through DEP for temporary armoring under Florida statutes and the Florida Administrative Code, the town needs to pass a resolution declaring an emergency for the specific area as determined by the town engineer. The emergency permits will allow the homeowners to install temporary armoring structures while they are given time to pursue permanent structure applications through DEP within 60 days of installing the emergency temporary armoring structures. We have the town engineer's report on my desk if any of the town commissioners wanted to look at them, but I also gave you a couple in your packet with pictures to show you the severity of the erosion at this time. And Wayne is here to answer questions as well. He helped the town engineer conduct the field observation reports.
Shopping.
It is sharp. Public comment? Yes.
My name's Jim Leiter. I live at 6083.
Okay, Jim, if you want to step up to the mic.
I'm Jim Leiter, 6083 Old Ocean. I'm one of the victims of the erosion. along with 5 of my neighbors. And so we have hired a engineering firm to look at this problem and to possibly come up with some solutions. And in addition, the public access is adjacent to my property. And so I've talked with your engineer, Wayne, about incorporating whatever solution we do, work together on this issue. And I appreciate the town's cooperation and the help that they're steering us in the direction. It's going to be a long process, and I'm not sure what the final solution will be, but it's a pretty serious problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner comments? Ebola, Commissioner?
Gentleman here.
Good afternoon. My name is John Scheibels. I live at 6021 North Ocean Boulevard. I have the house on the north side of Edith Street going to the beach, adjacent to the town right-of-way and the steps down to the beach. I became aware of the concern and I started to review the implementation of what's going to happen with the beach renourishment. And I addressed the issue with Wayne, and also I think the town engineer came on a site visit. I just wanted you to be aware of the conditions and what's happening. My house is elevation 25, which is a very high point in town. The top of the steps are about 19, I'm talking about elevation. My dune is eroding from 17 below. So my 17 has now dropped to 0. In January, I met with the surveying team that was engaged to analyze and to do the surveying on the replenishment. And I became aware that they're only going to replenish up to elevation 7.5, which is equivalent to the landing that was just built this fall on those steps. I have some historical pictures that I would like to share with the commissioners. And I think it's an important point to go about. Some of these pictures I've given to Wayne in the past, and I'd like to just hand these out. The pictures are existing conditions of the, let's say, the walkway down to the beach and how it exists now and what it looked like 10 years ago, as well as pictures that were taken by Pete years ago, a few years back, when several groins were removed south of Edith Street. Which we're interpreting as a possibility for the immense erosion that we've had. I also include in that package pictures of what the property looked like after the last beach replenishment. In addition to those pictures, I'd like to present one that was taken today and a picture of what it looked like after replenishment. You can see from those pictures that the erosion that's happened is significant. I brought it to discuss for a couple of reasons. One of the difficulties with the neighborhood is access. There's no equipment access that can be had. I know in the past we tried as private residents years ago to get through the Boynton Beach town property across the street, but there's no real access for us to get equipment. We have a beach replenishment scheduled. My last conversation was that they were going to start March 15th in Ocean Ridge and be done by April 15th. What I'm raising is there's an opportunity, if there was an opportunity to get more sand for us, whether it be a public or private. We're all in this together because you have the access road also. You know, we have a significant problem right now. You know, declaring a state of emergency is nice for temporary barriers or permitting for permanent ones too. But we have an opportunity to do something on an immediate basis. I just don't know how. That's why I'm here tonight. Thank you. Any questions?
So Wayne and Tracy, you'll work with the gentleman on the situation. You are.
Yeah.
But, by the way, has everybody actually seen these properties and the ones on Yale Street? It's stunning.
You know, I built the house 20 years ago, and I had a condo 14 years ago before that in town. So I've been here 34 years. I've seen the beach. My northern residence is in New Jersey on the ocean. I lived through Sandy, one of the major storms. I've lived through here with many hurricanes too over 34 years. I've never seen the beach erosion like this. In that package, you'll have a picture of 1999 when I was doing pilings on the site and how large that beach was. And Ted Vitola used to keep his catamarans in front of the house and go out. You don't have that opportunity. You don't, you know, there's significant thing. We have an opportunity if Santa's being pumped to do something. I implore all of you to give me direction or let me help you in any way, shape, or form, whether it be a private,
Thank
public
you. It's a
opportunity.
good suggestion. So Tracy, any follow-up with the beach renourishment people, that if it requires money, it sounds like private money is available for certain.
Seems like we need to get the
Or public money
resolution
too. We have town,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm here.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a motion that we pass the resolution before us?
You have more public comment.
Actually, I want to respond to what I think was an excellent suggestion, which was to capitalize on having this access already established by the Army Corps of Engineers or the DEP or whoever's.
address?
Pardon me?
Name and
What's your name and
Oh,
address for the
Elizabeth
record?
Thompson, 6191 North Ocean Boulevard. So, because I asked the same question the other day, since the equipment's already here, why couldn't we coordinate something to take advantage of that, to, at our expense, add what we need or what we think we'd be ready to do? And I was told it was just, it was been contracted for such a long time, and it was impossible to coordinate that kind of cooperation. And I'm wondering if you, the town, could do something to facilitate that sort of agreement and cooperation.
Yes, we will attempt that, yes.
Terry Brown, Harbor Drive South. I just wanted to point out, and I hope I don't get in trouble for doing this, but the town owns 25-foot road right-of-way right across the road to the ocean. So there is a way in which you can get trucks and equipment through there. It's something to consider,
Thank you.
and it's owned by the town, not Point Beach.
Yeah, it's confirmed. Yeah.
Positive?
They denied you access? Well, that's the town that's denying you then.
I don't recall that. Yes.
Alan Waters, 6059 Old Ocean Boulevard. And I'm new, less than a year here, but I'm 3 houses south of Jim. And it's really quite amazing what happened in the last, pretty strong winter storm. And, the 2 homes between us, they've lost their decks, their stairs, and most of their dune. I mean, it's really gone. And everyone says the last time this happened was Sandy. So I think that the damage is roughly equivalent to Hurricane Sandy damage. And that's pretty big, from what I've been told anyway. So that's it.
Thank you, Alan. Yes. Can't wait till we get to the ordinances.
Ted Ritoda, I'm at 4 Hudson, and I'm not new here. I've been here a long time, and I go to the beach a lot. I go to the beach a lot in the storms to see what's going on. And part of the problem that we're dealing with right now is it's not just the beach erosion, it's dune erosion. These last couple of storms have significantly cut into the dune. And the last beach restoration that we had, I'm talking specifically on the Edith Street access now, they rebuilt the dune to the point where when we walk off that access, we were walking off the uppermost horizontal part of the access onto the beach right there. So basically, they covered all of the new steps that are there right now. If they go only up to the platform, that's not going to be enough for a very long time. I don't know if anything more can be done about that now, and I know it spreads, but this dune erosion, not the beach erosion, is the part that's significant. The beach comes and goes. The dune doesn't come back.
Any other public comment? Commissioner comments, or would you like to make your motion?
I'll make a motion that we pass this resolution for the Commission, Town Ocean Ridge, Florida, declaring a state of local emergency and providing an effective date.
I'll second it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, I'm moving on to the joint workshop discussion items, ordinance number 2019-15, regulating synthetic turf. Would somebody from PNC like to start? Or actually, I gotta start with
Are you
public
doing
comment.
public comment before? Yeah, public comment first. Oh.
Any public comment? Yes.
John Zessen, 6029 Old Ocean Boulevard. I wasn't here at the last meeting, but from what I heard occurred during the meeting, I wanted to bring forward a couple of things, because up to this point, I haven't heard any discussion on this banning of artificial turf with any scientific evidence whatsoever. Everything has been, we don't like the way it looks. But a couple of points were brought up regarding polypropylene and how polypropylene leaches into the soil and then emits emissions into the air. I'm a polymer scientist. I've been in the business for 40 years. So let me give you some facts. Plastics are made by polymerization. Once they're polymerized, to break them down, you have to have significant heat or significant chemical penetration to do that. Polypropylene is a plastic. Heat needs to be above 340 degrees to break polypropylene down. Emissions are measured by VOCs, volatile organic compounds. Polypropylene is the lowest VOC thermoplastic in the world. When we look at other compounds that we're discussing here that might be worse than polypropylene that are pertinent, gasoline might be number one. Gasoline fumes might be number two. Fertilizer might be number three. And pesticides might be number four. And they're significantly worse than polypropylene. Whoever claimed in the last meeting that polypropylene leaches into the earth and emits fumes claims so without scientific basis.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Are all the turf today made out of polypropylene?
They used to be made out of nylon.
Yeah.
They're all made out of polypropylene now.
Okay, thank you. Public comment? Polly?
Hi, Polly Jo at 35 Hersey Drive. I just want to also address a few things that came up at last meeting. Under health aspect, there was a mention of MRSA in artificial turf. EPA, in conjunction with CDC and Consumer Product Safety Commission, did a report that was commissioned in 2016. The report came out in like July of 2019. Now, the report is really on recycled tire crumb, but in that report, they looked at a health study from MRSA. that they referenced. And they cultured the Staphylococcus bacteria and MRSA from samples collected at 5 synthetic turf fields and 2 grass fields. In that study, 2 of the 30 samples collected from synthetic turf were positive for a species of Staphylococcus, compared to 6 of 12 samples collected from natural turf. No MRSA was detected on synthetic turf, while a single sample blade from natural turf was positive for MRSA. It makes sense when you think about biology and bacteria. The bacteria needs more nutrients to grow, which grass provides. So I just want to say that from the health aspect of synthetic turf and MRSA, it doesn't hold up. And the only other comment I want to make is on manufacturing and pollution. Manufacturing has compliance. I've spent 25 years purchasing raw materials in manufacturing. There's compliance, there's reporting. There are people in manufacturing within the organization that specifically all they do is compliance on how materials are handled, how materials are disposed of. If you're concerned about offshore, all you have to do is put in the ordinance that manufacturers must be based in the United States. I have more, but my 2 minutes are up. Thank you.
Peter?
Peter Burling, 7 Osprey Drive, Ocean Ridge. Let me begin by saying I come from New Hampshire, and up in New Hampshire we believe passionately in public discourse, the back and forth among citizens. And to that end, we've tried, many of us, to communicate as clearly as we could the following ideas. First of all, there are many in this town who find the current version of the ordinance to be a grotesque overreach of town power into the private rights and obligations of landowners. The second point, which I've clearly failed to communicate, which I really beat myself up about, the first time I stood here, I tried to say there are problems with the ordinance as drafted which would cause me great pause. Those problems have not been resolved. And I'm really concerned about what happens if those problems aren't addressed in a reasoned and calm approach. To that end, there are a number of us in town, and I told the Vice Mayor this some time ago, hard at work on the prospect of an alternative compromise, and I heard you loud and clear, ma'am, that could be the basis for a compromise solution to what everybody wants here. But the only way we get to that compromise and the review of that document is if we agree to have an opportunity to sit down and talk about it. I have it, should you ever wish to see it.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Jean Burling. I'm Peter's spouse, and I live at 7 Osprey Drive, too. I'd like to address the problems that we as a group see with the ordinance and have some concerns about the drafting of it, and that's why we believe it ought to go back to the P and Z for reconsideration. Let me begin. Taking language from another town's ordinance, as you've done in Lantana, represents some particular problems. First of all, relying on that ordinance, it does not include a prohibition for artificial turf anywhere in town. However, you use the regulation portion of the ordinance for your proposed ordinance. I suggest that you need to speak with Lantana about their experience with this ordinance. There is no whereas provision in this ordinance. There is no expression of why this is necessary. What is the point? And I think you'll find in Peter's proposed ordinance a very well, a very well stated whereas portion, which would explain why artificial turf regulation is necessary in this town. There is no definition section of this ordinance. There are many words of art that are used that have no definition. We don't understand what is minimum material standards. What is that? What is the definition of yard? What is side yard? Is it in the ordinance? If it's not in the ordinance, does it refer to another portion of the general ordinance? What is, my time is up. Okay, let me just say. On the locations allowed, this portion of the ordinance is very specific, however, it's not applicable in an easy, understandable way. What is, as I said, the definition of a side yard, a backyard? Why did you choose 25%? What is the rational basis for 25%? Could it be 23%? Could it be 30%? Are you aware that the health regulations in the state require no artificial turf to be used over a leach field? That would cover probably 50 to 75% of the homes in this town are already prohibited from using artificial turf because their septic leach field is in the front. I know there are others who wish to talk. I will defer. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Arthur Ziv, 9 Osprey Drive. Thank you for holding this workshop. And I'll try to be brief. One, this is not a divisive issue. There were over 150 people who signed the petitions. The overwhelming majority of the people and citizens who were here were opposed to the ordinance. Only a handful who were for it. It's not divisive. It's a very clear message being given by the citizens. I'd like to point out that, as been detailed, there are no grave environmental or health concerns with synthetic turf. Those studies were based on on synthetic turf using rubber fill as opposed to sand, which is what all the commercial products, the residential products are. I will tell you, I firsthand experienced the Las Vegas Raiders, the NFL football team. Their brand new field is sand-based artificial turf. That was their decision. How do I know this? Because we use the exact same field on one of our schools. And then the EPA study, the most current EPA study shows there is no big concern here. The environmental and health arguments are disingenuous. They're a red herring. If that was truly the issue, if these were truly the most awful product in the world, then people should be standing up, pounding on the dais saying, we can't allow this anywhere. But to say, well, we'll allow it, but only here, but not here, that's disingenuous. If it's not a health problem, this is all about certain members of the community wanting to dictate homeowners' decisions. I'd like to put up, if you put up this little sheet here. It all comes down to aesthetics. So let me just show you a couple things. Thank you very much. Thanks. So I went to the eye doctor the other day and did that little test, which is better, this or that. So my question for you is, which is better, this or that? By the way, that is on the front yard of probably the most expensive home in this town. Again, please, which is better?
Keep going.
Could you hit the next frame, please? Which is better, this or one more time? This one, which is what caused all the controversy. Which one is better? And the last set, if you would, please. Thank you. Which is better, this yard or this yard, which you may not know is in Ocean Ridge, that is entirely synthetic turf. So I will just leave it at that. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Any other public comment? Yes.
Britt Flanagan, 5556 North Ocean Boulevard. Every town ordinance could be considered an infringement on property rights. Ordinances govern good standards and best practices. However, property rights as well as personal rights end when they infringe on someone else's rights. The purpose of an ordinance is to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the community as a whole. With a long history of questionable and hazardous chemicals affecting human and animal life, as well as our ecosystem, establishing an ordinance regarding the use of artificial turf is of utmost importance to the health, safety, and welfare of our community. Even with enhancements, latex or something that is new, coconut, a mixture of natural cork and coconut husks, the jury is still out regarding the health and environmental safety issues, whether we're talking about old or new generations that haven't been tested. Early composition of grass blades leads to cancer, especially in athletes and young children, because of exposure to lead, et cetera. We've talked about that. Further exposure to pregnant women, athletes, children have affected lungs, kidney, liver, reproductive organs, hormone suppression, and skin. In general, a statement by the National Institute of Environmental Health, NIES, and the Environmental and Human Health, Inc., and other studies say by no means can we prove that artificial turf is safe. So the jury is out, there is no conclusive evidence. And there has been a history in the artificial turf industry to deceive the buyers and to often non-disclose the issues as far as what is being used. I understand that the rubber crumbs are not being used, and I applaud new ways of dealing with it, but we are still dealing with the unknown. Another issue that was never brought up by anybody, but a review of landscaping standards and the use of artificial turf in the city of Glendale, a study that was produced by an independent firm, no skin in the game, no political overtones. The companies are Rescape and Placework, and they also deal with risk management, and they deal with a number of cities throughout California. The study found that turf leach risks could be lessened by locating the artificial turf in locations that do not flood, and by lining the fields so that the leachate could be collected and diverted into the wastewater system, allowing it to be processed by the city wastewater treatment. I think that also the town needs to be cognizant of the fact that they should make sure that any ordinance, they will not be complicit if a neighbor sues a resident, and that their ordinance protects them from that issue. And individual homeowners should be aware that they need to be sure that they make their guests, children, the parents of children, aware that there still is potential risk. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I never enjoy the absurd. The absurd is defined by a group of people. Oh, Janet Shines, 111 Dolphin Bend. I never enjoy the absurd. The absurd is often made by a group of people, convinced of their point of view, pushing forward where anyone with logic would fear to go. It is absurd to say that I would have to notify someone if I had artificial turf because of the danger of it, when in fact in this town I watch everyone using fertilizers, which have been proven by a number of studies to be much more toxic than any artificial turf I could put down. The state of California, the state of Washington, and the NTP have all looked at the toxic effects of artificial turf, and they found no conclusive evidence of the same. Those same agencies, when looking at the toxic effect of fertilizers used to make our grass beautiful and green and bug-free, found issues in groundwater, joint contamination, and have issued a study in the state of Washington that children should wash their hands thoroughly as well as their bodies after playing on natural fields, not artificial turf. So we really need to look at the facts here and not have a ruling that's based on aesthetics or fear, but things that are based on facts. I would implore you as a commission and a planning and zoning committee to go back to the board and figure out what you're really trying to do in our lovely little town of Ocean Ridge. Are you trying to make your rule our rule, or are you listening to the people who vote and elect you and pay the taxes in this town? We are not an audience. We are a concerned group of taxpayers, listening to us, protecting our property rights, and knowing your facts versus fiction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so we're moving to the discussion phase now. So, Rick's gonna be the main person because Mark's gonna quote. What is the intent? When you guys were doing this ordinance, what was the intent of the ordinance?
We have no ordinance at this point on artificial
The
turf.
proposed
So
ordinance, let's say.
So, not the proposed ordinance, prior to that, the town, and it was brought forward, I can't remember the origins of this, and with the assistance of staff, we asked for information as to what other communities in Palm Beach County similar to ours are doing. And with staff's assistance, the ordinance that's proposed and brought forward evolved. We're here today not to defend the ordinance, but to work in a workshop, hear from our fellow citizens here in this town, and most of all from you commissioners who are the elected representatives of our town as to the direction you want to take. If the direction you care to take is for us to further refine this, to drop it, that is your prerogative, because ultimately the ordinances of this town are passed by you as the town commissioners. So we'd like to hear your direction, and we'll act on that.
Thank you for great words, great words. One thing that somebody said about, well, based on a code of another town, which I just happened to stumble into, that town was Lantana. And the only objective, that's why I asked what your intent was, the only objective Lantana had when they started that ordinance was that you wouldn't put artificial turf in the swale. That was it. And it's not even accomplished by the end of the day in their ordinance, because you can put it anywhere. So that's why I was curious, like, where you guys started from. Okay. Anybody want to talk to P&Z? I could go through my list, whatever. Okay.
I again, and I think I said this the other night, I applaud you. This was not a quick and pull an ordinance out of somebody else's playbook and just squeeze it in and make it fit for our town. I understand that you spent more than 5 to 6 different meetings, so that's a period of 5 to 6 different months, coming up, looking at different things, looking at different areas. So I just like to say thank you, and I honestly feel like in a certain way, even though I heard tonight that the idea is to find a reasoned and calm approach, I think at a way that you were vilified at last Monday's meeting, not unlike some of the commissioners here, and I have to just tell you, I'm sorry for that, because you put in a lot of work to come up with a product, like you said, you're trying to do what's best for the town, not what's best for Penny or what's best for Rick. So I just, personally, I'd just like to tell you, thank you for the work.
One of the challenges we have is that we have open meetings. They're posted in advance. They're public meetings. We solicit input, and we sit on that dais in front of an empty room.
Change the time of the meeting.
And it's important for people to pay attention. It helps us. If we have this input earlier, we'll all have more success. So this applies to this and any other items, so.
Right, well, I'm not joking when I say change the time of your meetings, because people tend to head to work at 8 in the morning when you guys meet. And I know you're trying to meet to fit your schedule so you can head off afterwards. But if you really want more public participation, you could move the meetings to 5:30 or 6 in the evening. Then you'd have more people.
I think that Janet Stein hit on an issue that is, when you spoke about aesthetics within the town. If you take all the science out of it, really that's, and I've attended almost all the P&Z meetings and whatnot, but it seems to me what what we're really looking for is a commonality between where the different neighbors have different views or opinions or what looks good and what doesn't look good in their yard. Now, we've got a number of ordinances in town right now that pretty much state where you can put sheds, where you can put fences. And so we're looking at, if you're using artificial turf, and I want to put a putting green turf in my front yard, and my next door neighbor wants to put a different type of turf in his yard, it's going to look awful. And so what we're really trying to do, and that's one of the issues that we did with the chain link fences, is that the chain link fences just don't fit in Ocean Ridge. I don't have any problems with where you put artificial turf or how much artificial turf you put in. I think what we're really trying to do is to find a common type of turf that works throughout the community. And Art said that, I think it was John's house up on Old Ocean, that was the house that started this whole thing. That's not the house. John's house, with a few exceptions, is one of the better installations of artificial turf. I think we know where the issue came from, and it's right on A1A. And it could have done so much better if that individual had a standard type of turf that we were using throughout the community and followed some rules about front yards, backyards, and so on and so forth, visibility and whatnot. But we've got what the P&Z did. It was artificial turf, synthetic grass, section 66-142. If you focus just on that issue, which says how high it is, what colors it could be, and so on and so forth, if we could agree on that throughout the community, then the other issues are very minor. But what I see is that we need to have some standardization within the community for artificial turf. And if we can go from there, agree on that, and then say, okay, well, you can't put it over a septic system. If you put it in the backyard, does it make any difference whether it's a full yard or 25% of the yard? Is it side yard? If you put it in the front yard, if it's not visible from the street, can you put up a hedge? Can you put up a wall? Then you can put it in your front yard. I think all that is secondary to the condition or to the issue of let's all agree on what, if we're going to put artificial turf down, what is it going to look like? Is it going to be standard from yard to yard? And that's
Excellent.
my humble opinion.
So I know Peter, I happen to have read the ordinance that he referenced, and if it would be okay, I'd like to introduce that to the record, because half of his ordinance covers exactly what you're talking about, which is the manufacturing and the quality of the.
So is it different than what we have?
It's much more extensive, and it helps your it addresses your question.
Well, it's up to P&Z for
Would you like to
recommendation.
see it?
You asked for comments, and I'm just telling you that's my comment. I'd like to hear what P&Z has to say on that.
Can we express a couple of opinions?
Sure.
And have an open dialogue?
Yes.
Because now you're talking about a more extensive ordinance, when your argument all along has been that this infringes on personal, private property rights. That's a make-weight argument. I'm just gonna put it out there, the bottom line is, this is about planning and zoning's authority or not. And
Penny, it's for
It's for
the
the
record,
audio.
so that way I can, for the minutes
sorry.
later.
I feel like this is more about planning and zoning's authority. If you're talking about an ordinance now that's more extensive, that's a make-weight argument. The private
I didn't understand
property
that word. What? A make-weight?
make-weight argument, sorry.
Red herring,
Okay,
baloney.
we have 4.5 inches of ordinances that infringe on private property rights in some form or fashion, i.e. where your generator can be. They're all designed, hopefully, for the better of the town. And I'm sorry, someone said it's not a divisive issue. It is clearly a divisive issue with words like grotesque and absurd and all of this situation. And it's sad that it has become so divisive in such a small town when I really don't believe fake grass is the issue. And I have heard over and over again that none of us are going to put fake grass, we just want the right to. But what happens? It's a law of unintended consequences. You give that right, and then everybody does it, and as you say, there are 19 different colors and 75 different manufacturers. Some standard. I'm not saying it has to be the ordinance we put forth. We are happy to talk about it. We would have been happy to talk about it any of the 6 times we've already talked about it. And I'm sorry that the 8 o'clock hour maybe is not the right hour. Maybe we do need to look at that. But some sort of ordinance. Again, I go back to the point I made at the planning and at the commission meeting, and that is property values. There are a lot of things we have in this town. We've got the beach patrol, which is a luxury. Our taxes pay for that. If ordinances generally mean higher property values, some sort of control, some sort of governance. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox.
That was very
I'm
good.
gonna stop.
But I don't want you to misunderstand what I was talking about in Peter's, the manufacturing section. It lays out the quality, let's say, the quality and the installation.
But that's presupposing you have an ordinance that you need to lay that out for.
Yeah, but if right now, at the last commission meeting, we said, let's move this back to P and Z for a rewrite. That was what the discussion was. That was what the vote. That was what the vote was.
We just we didn't. We just didn't want to throw the vote out right that we wanted to have it because we had an upcoming workshop that then we could have dialogue.
Okay.
But it wasn't throw it back
I
to
think we're
change it.
saying the same thing.
But to establish and build upon all three of what you said, I think it would help us in just this open forum, because I think the way that it has been presented by most is it was kind of an all or nothing thing, and that was never the intent of the ordinance. So I would just like to hear from everybody on the commission and from P and Z, just a yay or nay. Do you mean you want no ruling, no standardization, or is there some kind of middle ground to your point?
If I can speak to the way I saw the meetings that we conducted in P and Z regarding the turf, it was driven by aesthetics. It was driven by the desire among some in our community to have an entirely natural environment. There's pros and there's cons to that. You're going to use lots of fertilizers, pesticides, and you name it to keep the grass looking green. There could be some downsides to the artificial turf. I think Don is on the right track. If we're going to allow it, we should set some standards on it. And
So yes, you'd be in favor of passing some sort of ordinance on artificial turf?
I would be, but I want you to understand, I probably was more critical of what was going on than anyone else, because I tend to be a libertarian, and so I believe that people have rights to make a decision what they do with their property if it's consistent with good health. And so I might not be on the same page as some of the rest of you, but that's how I've looked at what we did.
And to further Penny's comment, in the ordinance, there's a whereas clause. It's in every ordinance that we have as far as sheds and things that we're going to talk about tonight. And it says, whereas the town commission has determined that the enactment of this ordinance is for a proper municipal purpose and in the best interest of residents of the town. That's, in my mind, what we're trying to accomplish, and it's just really gone off the deep end on other issues. Go ahead, Mark.
Don, you have to use your...
You know,
Go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, is P and Z still talking? Okay,
Mark
sorry.
Marsh. I'm kind of fading here, so bear with me. The intent, as Rick put it so concisely, is, we saw that artificial turf was being installed in the town, and we felt that as a commission that we should introduce an ordinance or some method by which, people could put artificial turf. We never in any way outlawed the use of artificial turf. We looked at it and we felt that there are certain legitimate areas and uses that would benefit from the use of artificial turf. But the concern was, and that's what I think, that whole charade, and I have no other word for what took place on that commission meeting. I've never seen such a disgusting assembly and response from people, that it was more self-interest driven, because this rights, as it was just discussed, the rights of people are determined by the ordinance. And we have two other items on the agenda today, sheds and, I can't even remember the signs, which again infringe on people's rights. Anyway, I won't get off on that, because I'm feeling terrible. We did this in good faith for the town in terms of aesthetics, as was mentioned, and also the practicality that artificial turf has a reasonable use in certain conditions for pets, for shaded areas, and all the other. We just felt that if we brought out a whole blanket ordinance that, either covered, you're allowed to do it, or you were denied of using any of it, wasn't the right way. We thought we were taking, and as Rick mentioned, we used Corey and his expertise to research other communities, and it seemed that what we're proposing here is what has already been adopted in most of the other communities. So we're not out there on the pioneer trying to restrict people's rights or what they can and can't do. So I think it was a good effort on our part to try to introduce the subject and the use of artificial turf without totally regulating and allowing some flexibility. And, the backlash is, I think, being overblown, and I'll pass it on before I collapse here.
By the way, let me just say that you shouldn't feel like that you guys are under personal attack. If that has come through, it's probably in the heat of the moment or something like that. Everyone appreciates it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it helped matters when commissioners call the audience a mob. That certainly doesn't slow things down. Yes, Rick?
I think what we need to establish, if the direction is going to be for us to massage this and bring another ordinance back, and that may or may not be the direction. You may determine that you want to vote this one up and down, because it did pass 3-1 one time before. So this is a decision the five of you have to make. But if it is to come back to us, this is the right time for us to get an understanding of what are the elements you'd like to have. I think one of the key elements we were looking at was what was visible from the road. If what isn't visible from the road, if it was 100% allowable in areas elsewhere, I think that's a sensible compromise. But what was very much a concern about the aesthetics that this town has established is one of the things that really makes this town great. And the concern is that the large-scale use of artificial turf, if allowed, would change the feel of the town. That was the sense, if I can speak for the other commissioners. But that's not our decision to make. We're a recommending body. We're here to do the work, work with staff, and bring those things forward. So we did bring a recommendation forward. We made our best efforts. And in order to go back and rework it, if that's the direction, we do need that input as to what you as a commissioner would like to see in that.
Any other words?
Neil, any input there? Pass it around the table.
My input on it would be, I didn't want to see, and understand I'm an alternate, so my input was not at a meeting sitting on the dais. Artificial turf is not allowed on top of septic drain fields. I did not want to see a quilt in the front yard. I wanted to see one or the other. One is not allowed, so I would like to see turf in the front. I don't want to see turf in public rights of way in front of the houses for the same reason. I don't want to see artificial turf next to grass. The backyard, we have many older houses that the septic is in the back. It's now advocated by the health department to put them in the front, but the older homes are in the back. The 25% probably gives you enough space in the back to utilize some artificial turf. If you want to adjust that number, that's no different than the pervious impervious number. That's in your domain. You can pick a different number if that's what the community wants. But my feelings were that in the front, it should be uniform.
Christine, you got anything to add here? I think we've been down their road.
I think Jim was
Yeah,
Oh,
about,
Jim, I'm sorry.
about 7 years ago, I was fishing in northern Wisconsin, had a nice 24-inch walleye on the hook. I got a phone call from Ocean Ridge telling my front hedge needed to be trimmed up. Talk about gross overreach.
Did you catch the walleye?
Yes. To me, the issue is we have a continuum. On the one end, we have no limitations whatsoever on turf in people's yards. And on the other extreme, we have no limitations on outlawing totally together. Somewhere in between those two extremes is a point which satisfies the needs of the community and satisfies the need of the homeowner, their rights. The question as I see it is, are we at that point? If we are at that point, then let's vote it up or down. If you think it needs more study and the needle needs to be moved more toward the rights of the homeowner, or more to the rights of outlawing it altogether, then let's move to that point. And to me, when I walk around, the first thing that jumps out when I see it is the aesthetic question. I'm not sure we've completely addressed that as fully as we should, because some of the even the new stuff looks like a rug to me.
Sure, I mean.
Just before the commissioner, I'm sorry.
Sure.
It came up, and this is an important point, because we have, where the town property meets the homeowner's property is pretty deep in a lot of, between the curb and the property line. So there's a swale area required by the town. And if the direction is to allow it in the front of the houses, then we have to decide, does the town want it in their swale, in the town property that can be as much as 15 or 20 feet off the curb or the edge of the pavement? If the town doesn't want it, and on the town property, then you've got a very interesting patchwork in front of homes. That's my home.
15-foot front
You
yard
go
setback
along,
in most
and how
homes.
you can tell a lot is, look where the fire hydrants are set, and those fire hydrants are on town property. So it's a lot deeper than most homeowners realize, that it's town property.
And that's where you would come in with a wall or a hedge in back of the fire hydrant, and then it's not visible from the street. And if it wasn't covering your septic system in the front of the house, in my mind, that's fine, put it there. But you do need some type of barrier between the swale. You just can't bring it down and butt the artificial turf up against the grass that the town has in the swale. And it goes back to the aesthetics. That's the real issue, in my mind.
Another point that you had made on the P&Z level is if you allow it in the front with shielding, then you're going to have possibly a bunch of properties that now are walled in around the town. That's an unintended consequence. So.
Okay.
Okay.
So.
Then we look like Gulfstream.
It's one of the things that makes this town nice, is that you drive around and you have, you see the homes. It's not like going to Palm Beach where they're behind hedges or walls.
So, I think you're asking a question, I don't know if it's time
I don't think we're finished with comments.
No, I'm not saying that, but both of you have asked the identical question, really. You know, what are we doing, right? So, we had a vote at the last meeting that we would send it back, send it to the workshop, I guess we call it, right? So, are we still on that page? Because what we're being asked is, are we wasting everybody's time?
No, I
Well,
think
we
right
haven't
now,
talked though
we're
yet. I don't
workshopping
think
it.
Susan said anything, and
Yes,
I haven't
exactly.
said anything.
Yeah, we're
so-
workshopping it here, right?
Okay.
That's why we went down the line, everybody had their little, you have something? You wanna go?
Right, Phil?
Can I say something?
Phil.
Go for it.
Okay,
All
yeah,
right.
go ahead.
I don't know who was at the last meeting 2 weeks ago, but I'm completely confused because all we talked about was how bad it was for the environment and how everybody else was saying it was good for the environment. And that's why I was totally confused. So if it's not an environmental issue, I don't think it looks bad. I think it was aesthetically pretty. When he showed the pictures, they looked good. When I was sent to that house on A1A, I guess I was sent to the wrong house, but the one I looked at, it looked good in the front yard. So I have no problem with the aesthetics. And if we're going to take away people's private rights, then we should have evidence to take it away. And it should be bad for the town. And I don't really think artificial grass is bad for the town, and I don't think we should infringe on people's property rights. And if it's not an environmental issue, if we all agree that it's at least a wash, that it's maybe a little bit bad for the environment, but the other things that it's saving is good for the environment, and that's a wash, does everybody agree with that? It's
No.
not an
No.
environmental issue anymore?
No, we just haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, all right. But aesthetically, I don't think the artificial grass, if it's done right, see, what I think you should do is it shouldn't be an artificial grass ordinance. It should be a blight issue. If they put bluegrass in the front, then I agree, so you could go by colors. If you want to restrict it in such a way that it looks nice, but the 3 pictures Art put up, I thought it looked good. Do you guys think it looks bad? Did you guys see the picture? It's bad? No, because I mean, people have different tastes. I agree, not everybody agrees with me. So, okay, it looks bad? I'm the only one that thinks it looks good?
No,
All
no,
right.
there's plenty of people that don't mind it.
All right.
Sure.
Go ahead.
The properties that we saw the pictures of, where is the septic system?
Under the carpet.
No, but Neil, I agree with you that, we're not going to put it over septic systems. I agree with you. I'm just talking about an aesthetic thing.
Do we have them in town now that are?
Yes,
That's what I
Yes?
meant.
yes, and if there had been some regulation, we could have
But there
at least,
wasn't.
we could have at least helped that homeowner prevent spending all that time, energy, and money in doing something that wasn't, that's against county regulation.
Are we defending the indefensible?
I don't know what you mean there.
That we already have something that doesn't pass the health code.
Right, but it's a state law. The way it works on the septic fields is the county punts. You can't go to the county and have them give you permission to put it over a septic field. The state has to give you that permission.
Correct.
Right?
So did they get that?
I have no idea. But my point is that there is a rule that says the state does not want you to put turf, artificial turf, over septic fields. And the only way, so that exists already at the state level. You see what I mean? So if somebody's
I'm very
inadvertently,
aware of it.
yeah, if somebody's inadvertently put it over their septic tank because they were unaware of the state rule, the company that installed it is probably at fault. Because they should have known, right?
Correct.
Yes.
I have a question related to, we're still talking about ordinance 2019-15, correct? Okay, so this is something that doesn't really relate to artificial turf, but apparently is part of it, and it's for efficient irrigation. That's also part of what we're talking about, right? And I think that that's something, before we go entirely into the weeds, we should discuss efficient irrigation, especially for those people who like to have natural lawns. So maybe at some point we can talk about it. We've got a requirement here for moisture sensor and rain shutoff switches. Is that a grandfathered item, or is that going to be an immediate impact item for everybody who has a lawn in Ocean Ridge?
It would be, I believe, for, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's for new builds and 50% pluses.
Correct.
Yeah.
So-
It's,
No, it's not residential.
So no, nobody's gonna knock door to
But
door.
frankly, it would be a good idea, because I see sprinklers going right after we've had rain for a week.
Absolutely, but is that not a personal property right? Me knocking on your door and telling you to turn off your sprinkler because it's raining?
Well, you're kind of going for a stretch, I think, there, Christine, but I'm just asking questions, I'm not making assertions.
Okay. Did you want to go, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I had the pleasure, and actually I was very excited when I signed up to go to a 2-day gardening class at Mounts Botanical Garden, part of our Florida Federated and Ocean Ridge Garden Club. And the speaker today was a professor from the University of Florida, and she is the local coordinating Florida-friendly landscaping and native canopy education programs for not only the state, but for the county. And it was very interesting, and I just kept thinking, I can't get away from this, like what's happening. But one of the very direct things that she talked about was, and tried to encourage everybody about, was the Florida-friendly landscaping legislation. And what are the 8 requirements to do, and how do you receive certification? She had us all sign little pledges to say that we would help with this and that. And when she finally got around to it, one of the things that I asked her very directly was, what does this legislation do? And the legislation is from 2009. The article that I have is from 2011, was the original thing, and it has been revised in 2017. So the legislation was in 2009. And one of the questions that was asked once the legislation was in, because there was a lot of questions from everybody, how about rocks? Do we have the right to keep traditional landscaping, or do we have to pull it out now that we have all these, these other rules? And basically, was it permissible for homeowners to replace their yards with rocks, artificial turf, or rubber mulch? The answer is the Florida-friendly landscaping program does not consider artificial turf to be a Florida-friendly product. So I just wanted to establish that. I think there was maybe some misconceptions before. This lady is the leading expert for the county and the state. If we can't believe her, so I do believe it is partially an environmental issue. Is there a compromise position? Absolutely. But I wanted to just go back, because one of the things, we've talked about aesthetics, we've talked about the environment. I think one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is Penny's statement of property values. And it is a way, it is definitely, how do you balance between private property rights and community standards that you want to all maintain? Where is that line? And that line is different, I'm sure, in different ordinances at different times. I mean, we update our ordinances all the time based on new state regulation, best practices, new technology that comes out, like the rain sensor guard or stuff like that. So, I mean, community standards are just basically shared guidelines that define the look and the feel. The definition of that look and feel is that we maintain and hopefully increase our property values, because we all have a shared goal there. So we start to erode that and have no standards, or standards only in certain areas. My concern is that we will erode our property values eventually. It may not happen overnight, but eventually it will. If we erode our property values, that means the money that we get as a town in terms of taxes that supports our town will eventually drop also. If that drops, the first thing that we have to do is drop our level of service. And I don't think anybody is at this point ready to say, let's take away some of the nice things we have, the community police patrolling, the ATV on the beach, whatever the case may be, whatever it is that we do as a community that is above and beyond what we really need to do as a municipality. So my concern is not only environmental, obviously, but I also am very concerned that if there is not a certain level of community standards, that eventually our property values will erode, and by the time that that happens, it's going to be a little bit too late.
We've talked about aesthetics, and aesthetically, been in the design business here, I don't find it attractive, but it's not about what I find attractive. When I started really looking into the research here, I was more concerned about the environmental. And it is, it's a green road. There's nothing growing under there. There is no habitat being helped out. That's not what our beautiful canopy looks like here. So that was mostly where I was coming from. I think that in the big picture, what you all have worked on for 8 months and crafted is a good compromise. I think that we're allowing it, we're putting it in the back. As you said, most of the time in the front, it's probably gonna be in the wrong place anyway. It's in the side and the back. It's screened by green or wall, and I think that gives everybody who absolutely positively has to have it, their opportunity to have it, whereas it's not running rampant. I personally think it's bad for the environment. To me, that's a major deal. But compromise, right? It's all about compromise. And I think what y'all crafted was pretty much of a compromise. And I was at those meetings. I listened to y'all go back and forth, and I know who talked about what and pros and cons. I heard them all, and that's how you got there, was having these discussions. And all that time people talked, and you were talking to your neighbors and hearing it. This didn't come up out of nowhere. Y'all worked hard on that. And I think that you came up with a good compromise, regulation standard that I think the town could live with. I don't think it's overreach. So, I like it the way it is.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Can I, Christine, did you give us this, the
I did.
Florida? Okay, can I read this, though, just so you understand what Florida's saying? It's saying, well, what Christine said, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program does not consider artificial turf to be Florida-friendly product, and that's in yellow, right? If you read below, it says, heat transfer from the surface can contribute to psychological stress that may result in health-related problems. Well, if you got that problem, you should move out of Florida, because Florida's pretty hot, right? So is that why we think it's bad for us? Because we got psychological problems?
No, I mean, if you want to pick out pieces, then there's 20 other pieces that you can pick out of that.
But the
I
heat
mean,
transfer increases the heat you're normally going to have in your Florida landscape.
Right,
It's not
and
just heat in general for Florida, because we all know that. What do they say, mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the noonday sun? We know that.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, and it says like 200 degrees, well, 199, whatever,
Right.
so it's 200. But the environmental problem doesn't occur until it's 300, right?
No,
Or
no,
340.
underneath, where that little
No.
green carpet goes on, the environmental problem is going on from the beginning.
Right, but it seems like that's all balanced
but
out,
we're
right? I
talking-
mean, P and Z didn't come to us and say, this is an environmental mess, right?
No.
It was the audience that said it, and that's what was confusing me, because you had
Right.
50% of people saying it was the greatest thing, and 50% saying bad, and that's what the questions I was gonna ask about, and that's why I was confused at the last meeting. But I think the gentleman in the black shirt kind of cleared it up, and now it seems like we all, or most of us agree that it's not an environmental issue.
He cleared it
So
up
it's
for
either an aesthetic issue,
microplastics.
or it's a private right
Right,
issue.
no, I think that his discussion was the health issue, which the jury's still out on. Mine's the environmental issue, which isn't necessarily your individual health, it's the health of the ecosystem, which then obviously will affect us all. But that's the decision I'm coming in. The gentleman spoke there to the specific petroleum product and how hot it has to get before.
Well,
it
yeah,
gets
but he
to
also
ground.
talked about the gas, the
Right, right.
fumes, all that kind of
I'm
stuff,
talking
which
about
are
the
bad that we
ecological.
get with
Right,
regular
right,
grass.
I get that.
So there was one slide that this lady used today, and it just kind of encapsulated it and made it a little bit easier. She said, what are the things that artificial turf don't do? They don't filter pollutants, they don't reduce stormwater runoff, they don't help with heat dissipation, they don't create oxygen like a natural vegetation would. There's absolutely no wildlife potential because it disrupts and kills the natural ecosystem by killing all the bugs underneath, which then is to the butterflies, which then leads to the birds and the bees and the whole thing like that, the whole habitat. So understanding that is a very separate issue. Like she said, the jury's out as to whether the heat breaks down into microplastics and does it get into the aquifer. All of that studies, you're gonna find,
Both
yes,
sides.
both sides. What I just told you, though, is unequivocal.
Well, I guess so, but you're saying Florida says that, but what about California? Isn't California one of the most environmentally regulated states in the country,
And they-
and they give you rebates for artificial turf.
Some do, and remember last time I brought up the one outside San Francisco that pulled those rebates back, because after doing their ecological studies, they said, nope, we're not going
And
there.
when was that?
So you have, I don't know, it's in there somewhere. So you know somewhere in there with with California, they're not all online either, because a couple of the other studies that I did find were, the Rosedale one and the Glendale, California one that came from the third party that was asked to do a study that, what did we say, they were, underwriters. These guys are insurance, that makes a big deal. They want to know who's going to get sued and who's not in that city. So no skin in the game, and these were studies that came out of California as well. So again, you're not going to find across the board there, because right now it is a relatively new residential product, and relative is the word there, but it's, it's a residential product that we're playing this game right now, trying to figure out.
Yeah, but what I'm hearing from PNC was this was brought up because of aesthetics.
Originally, that's
Is that
what-
true or not? Is it an environmental issue to you guys? Have you guys delved into it, had people talk to you, kind of decided it's an environmental nightmare, or it's good for the environment, or you're neutral on that?
It was brought up, first of all, because we had no regulation of it, and it was taking place in our town, and that's not a good thing. So if we decide that we want it to be unregulated, that's different than just having something new happening and not. So that is the trigger. Then we tried to learn, there's not to reinvent the wheel, not to do all the research, but to learn from what other communities have done, primarily communities here on the coast in Palm Beach County. And then we debated among ourselves. And Dave is the libertarian of the group. And he keeps the group balanced. I think the rest of us are kind of centrist. And so there aren't any radicals on P and Z.
So they're all up here?
So, we did the best we could, and what I'm hearing, just in the discussion in front of me, is that there's a difference of opinion on the dais, and we have put our best efforts forward. It's passed on the first reading, and I think it should go to a second reading. That's my personal opinion. And if it stands on second reading, it stands. If it dies on second reading, then we'll do as directed.
Assuming you guys go ahead and vote to accept this at your later meeting, Don did make some good points about consistency of the product so that we don't have blue lawns and green lawns and putting greens and fields of glory. So is that something we would work into it subsequently, or does that need to be dealt with now?
No, that would come out of this discussion, which then you guys would take back and rewrite.
Is that not already
It's
part
already
of
in
it?
Yeah, I thought it's pretty much in there. There's like,
66, 142A1.
yeah.
Well,
I think y'all talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right,
Quite a
yeah.
bit on
It's-
Well,
Y'all
then,
did that.
If we want to delve down into the actual ordinance, right, and discussion points, issues, et cetera, I actually went through the ordinance pretty carefully. And I had some questions, concerns, which maybe will trigger something that you guys can tell me, or that needs to be added to the ordinance. Starting off, the ordinance does not address whether artificial turf is part of the newly required 35% open space. And that actually took me a full day to find out what the answer is. What is your intention? Is the artificial turf part of 35% open space?
I doubt it, because it wouldn't permeate the water, right? Or would it?
It's considered
Under
permeable, I believe. That's how the
Oh, under
ordinance
the
is written.
new.
Right.
It is.
Yeah, so, yes,
Right, so, yeah.
I would think the answer
I'm
would be
just-
yes.
So I would think that needs to be pointed out in the ordinance.
What else?
I got other things, sure. 4-inch strips of artificial turf between pavers, right? So think of, and it has to be 1.5 inches, the height, right? So all that is accomplishing is forcing the homeowner to dig deeper into the ground to get the grass level with the pavers. So putting an arbitrary figure, no, I guess it's not arbitrary, 1.5 inch height restriction doesn't seem to apply in the case of pavers, and certainly doesn't apply in the case of putting greens, right? We agree to that. Putting greens are 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch. So I think that needs to be, that needs to be dealt with. I'm assuming with the pavers, all you are looking for is an even look. Am I correct? Okay. So why 1.5 inch?
I think the putting green is part of it, is it not?
Yeah,
You have to
Did we
get
have
permission.
something?
that
Yeah.
was discussed, and P&Z, it went back to P&Z, and now the wording says unless otherwise approved by the town building official.
Right, now let's go to that
And
phrase.
that's the same could apply to the.
Let's go to that phrase. So the town official, Wayne says, no, you can't use that for your putting green. No, you can't put your putting green where you want to put it. That then causes that homeowner now to go get a variance if they want to put that in there, which is then costing them $1,500. What I'm trying to do is put in some language in the ordinance that takes care of those specific issues, so that Wayne isn't put in the uncomfortable situation of having to deny someone's desire. And instead of that, he can point to an ordinance. Septic tank field and coverage is not allowed by the state. Obviously, that should be added to the ordinance, right? Current ordinance wording, and I think this is a matter of cleanup. D says existing artificial turf, that's the heading. For those properties where artificial turf is currently installed, but that is not in compliance with this section, when the existing artificial turf is replaced or repaired in an amount exceeding 50% or more, then compliance with this section shall be required. Now, there's a standalone sentence after that. Then I've had 3 residents, in fact, you've probably heard this, that you're trying to ban artificial turf. Well, it comes from this sentence, which says, further, all existing artificial turf must be replaced within 10 years of the adoption of this ordinance.
And we need to modify that language to say further, all existing artificial turf not in compliance with this code must be replaced. So that's on me right there. That's, the intent was anything not in
What I'm doing is I'm bringing up
compliance.
these various
No,
items
I hear you.
that
Yeah.
I think you guys need to consider to go back to the ordinance, right? Artificial turf shall be visually level with the grain pointing in a single direction. I have no idea what that means. Does that mean that guy on A1A who's got the slant, that's not visually even? So it's more like you're talking, I know what you're trying to say. You don't care about the slant of the grass. You care about the evenness of the lawn, so to speak. The what?
And we're trying to avoid there being patchwork when there's repairs.
Right.
You know, the new lawn with the old lawn,
The seams.
we don't want it to look like a quilt.
But I think that needs to be addressed, because I don't get that from that, when I see visually level. You know, I think, like, this slant.
I've never found one.
The permit required. Why? You don't need a permit for sod. If you want to do something, I guess my question is, why do you want a permit? And I think the reason why you want a permit is for what Don brought up, so that there's a standard to the artificial turf. And by the way, when we're having these discussions and quoting studies and various, I have EPA documents that refute a lot of what you were just saying, but there's 2 different sets of studies out there. There's the studies of artificial turf, which is the fields, which is what most of the negative studies are about. And now there's this new 3rd generation residential turf that has nothing to do with rubber crumb. It's totally sealed. It's not leaking toxins. So when you go and do your research, you know, realize whether or not the study was of an athletic field or residential
Commercial
field.
landscape, yeah, we know.
Yep. Okay, so Mike, again, why do you need a permit? Why do you want the permit?
Well, I think in the instances where people have erroneously put this turf over drain fields by just not knowing it, at least you could have, if there was a permit involved, the town could have given direction so they didn't do something like that.
And also the quality issue.
Yeah,
I think all these little
Protection
these
of the
little,
homeowner
yeah.
as much as anything, because they or then they walk through with the building official, what they can and can't do. You don't come along and they put it in their front yard and contrary to the ordinance it passed, and then they're getting cited and going through an appeals hearing or whatever. It gives it's a benefit to not be out there
Yeah, it's good for, you've got
doing
these
it and being
specifics.
then cited that it might not be in compliance.
So underneath the word permanent, what you're trying to get is an installation, a type of grass, a quality of grass, right?
Bringing all those specifications forward, just like with any other construction material. Because this is more akin to construction material than a landscape material.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is the ordinance should cover the actual product, that's allowed.
It
Which-
does, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in there.
Right there.
It's pretty descriptive.
Yeah, it's pretty
No,
descriptive.
well, like installing, drainage. I know there was a gentleman, I don't know if he's here, who owns one of these companies. And he showed me what Lighthouse Point did on artificial turf installation. And they spent a ton of time on the environment issue about what was underneath the artificial turf, the substrata, we called it. I mean, it was like this entire two-page section on the substrata of artificial turf, which then allows the artificial turf longevity and to stay level, if you will. So I think that would,
And if you look closely at his yard, you'll see that it's buckling around the,
which yard are you talking? The A1A? Yeah.
didn't mean to bring it
Here's
up.
my other question, and I asked Brian this question. What is a side yard? You guys keep using this term side yard. So Brian said, oh, it's in the codes. Well, somebody was nice enough to find this for me. The code is not side yard, the code is interior yard. And the way it's described here, I guess I'll just read it. Yard front means a yard extending from the front of a lot being the required minimum horizontal distance between the front lot line and the front of the building. Or a yard extending across the lot and adjacent to a body of water. Now, yard interior is the next graph. Means a yard between any structure and the sideline of the lot, extending from the required front yard to the required rear yard, and being the minimum horizontal distance between a side lot line and the side of a structure or any projection thereon. So, if I have a house, let me just draw this real quick. So I have this house, right?
Let's see. Okay.
Pretend that's the garage sticking. My garage is protruding 20 feet beyond my front door, right? Now I draw a line from where my front yard meets my house. So by definition, in front of my front door is now a side yard, or an interior yard, which is the proper term in the code.
We would have to rewrite our entire code book if that were the case.
I think you probably know exactly what that means from the building, which is not the front yard. The front yard's the
Yes, I
street to
just
the
read
front
you
of the
the code.
building. I know, I listened.
Yeah.
Front yard is the street to the front of the building, right?
Well, what's
And
the front of the
over to
building?
the left, where's your door?
Right
Not your
here.
garage. Okay, that would be the front of the building.
Why?
Because that's the
Let's
front
say
of your house.
I say to Wayne, no. The garage is the first building that's intersected.
So no front yard? Aren't we supposed to have front
So,
yards?
no, the front yard is here. The front yard is down here.
Where's the street?
Oh, you want me to draw a street?
Yeah, what's the front?
I'm telling you that if,
It's not one straight line.
No.
This has been shown through
I just read you the actual code.
It was written by a lawyer, come on.
I know. What I'm saying is, if I went to put turf in my house and it went against the intent of what you're trying to do here, right?
Side yard has been used in every municipality as a reference to the side of the house.
That's not what the code says. I'm not trying to split hairs, I'm trying to explain
Corey.
the issues you have.
Corey, can you explain?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the side yard would, and I would certainly want to read the specifics of the language, but it's always interpreted to be between the side lot line and the side building line. It wouldn't include that area.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you, I'm just telling you that our code doesn't say that, that's all I'm saying. Now, here's my larger issue. How do we arrive at 25%? Why not 20%? Why not 30%? I don't, I just can't get my head around that. Because what it really is 15% of the backyard and the side yards.
How did you arrive at 15%?
Excuse me, I'm wrong. 15% of the property. Because let's pretend 25% front, 25% left, 25% right, 25% rear. The only place you're allowed is in that 75%. Right? 75% times 25% is roughly 15.
15% of the overall size of the
There
lot.
were some examples shown,
Yeah.
and I can't quote you specific, but you realize that in that side yard and rear yard, in most cases, are impervious areas, pools, pool decks, sidewalks, and then other landscape areas that aren't turf. And so when you get down to subtracting out those other things, 25% covers quite a bit. In some cases, it would cover everything that wasn't pool deck, sidewalks, other landscape
Generator,
Clarify that
sheds.
for me? Because this is different than what I was told by the town
And
officials.
we're going back and forth with Brian, now I'm gonna put him a little bit on, but on how this was covered, but I correct that the 25% is of everything.
The 25% is of everything. You look at the entire area minus the footprint of the actual structure. So you don't include pool decks, you don't include pools, you don't include generator pads, you don't include any of that. So it is just those specific areas. And then you're allowed 25%, the way it's written, you're allowed 25% of that entire area to be artificial turf, which, and I think P&Z had a long discussion on because of all the other stuff that's normally in side yards and backyards, that very well might encompass most of the rear or side yards by the time you actually, calculated that 25%. That was the way the discussion went.
So you don't care if it's 30%, 40%, 20%? You're just saying because of pools, decks, et cetera, you did some calculation that said, okay, there's this much left, and we're calculating that at 25% of the property.
That was the general thinking.
Right. So if I don't have a pool deck.
And each home's gonna be a little different,
Right, that's what I'm getting at, that's precisely what I'm getting at. So let's say I have a small pool, I have an identical house to you and I have a small pool, you have a big pool, right? I can now use less than, let me see how that would work.
You'd still have the same amount available, you just might have.
A less area. I couldn't, let's pretend I only had 23% of space, that I could use 25%, because I had the big pool.
But that's your choice to have a big pool. I feel like we're
It
chasing
seems rather
a
arbitrary
tail
to say
here.
25%. Like,
I
what are
think
you
we
really
could
trying
pass
to
an
accomplish?
ordinance to tell people everybody has to have a small pool.
Yeah.
What's that? Okay.
More or less, and I can't remember the exact.
Hang in there, Mark.
Steve, if you had an 11,000-foot lot, which is very typical.
Can we go to 10, just to make the math easy?
Pardon?
10,000, just for easier math.
No, I'm using 11. Okay? So let's say you put a 3,000 square foot single family residence on it. You've got 8,000 square feet left. Take 25% of it, you can have 2,000 square feet of artificial turf somewhere behind or the side of your property. If you take it up with a shed, you take it up with have to figure out if that 2,000 is still there. If you only got 1,800 feet left after you've covered all that other stuff, that's the amount you have. If you've got 3,000 left at the back, you can only have
Right.
2,000.
Neil, that's not 100% because we didn't take out the front yard. You have to take out the front yard to do the 25%.
Right.
And also, who's gonna buy an 11,000 square foot lot and build a 3,000 square foot house? They're gonna build a 37 square foot house.
It may be two-story and not on the, yeah.
Footprints.
Okay.
There's not a lot of good branches left.
Okay, so that, basically, I'm not a fan of this ordinance, as you know, so I'm trying to look for compromise here. Either to kill it or come to some compromise. And the biggie is, you guys are up to aesthetics, right? So, at the very first meeting, and I know you were here at the first meeting, I said, what's the problem if you can't see it from the road? If it's substantially not visible from the road? And no one seemed to have a problem with that. From an aesthetic standpoint.
I did.
If you took the existing world as it is, a concern is the one that was expressed here earlier, and I forget, is that it would encourage more walls, more
Hedges.
landscape barriers, more the walling off of our town. And that's something that we as P and Z have discouraged as we've seen applicants coming in and with their designs, that we want an open community. And that's been the view of this group.
So you discourage people from putting up hedges?
Walls.
I can understand the cement aspect of it, but, okay.
Let me say again, I'm sorry, I'm waking up here. You know, if we've used other coastal communities as reference, we're not sold on this. This is something that's been discussed and researched through our planning consultant. This is not like we're just.
Member Marsh, please use the microphone.
Sorry. Yeah, we're not just cherry picking here and saying this is what we're going to put as an ordinance to the residents of Ocean Ridge. This has been, and when it comes to property, if you tell me that Palm Beach is one of the most, if not the most expensive real estate communities in the country, if not the world, and they have an ordinance similar to what we're proposing here, is not allowing artificial turf in the front yard, and it's primarily to again uphold their property values and the aesthetics. So, you know, I think we've looked and researched. Corey has been very active in researching other communities and finding out similarities. No ordinance is going to be perfect, okay? I deal with this daily because I'm usually on the other side representing the client. But in this case, I think we've come to a conclusion that the criteria that's laid out currently in the ordinance seems to be fair. It seems to replicate other communities similar size, and again, aesthetics, the aesthetic fabric of the community itself, you know, which is unique. We are unique, and we want to preserve that. I mean, it's that. I mean, if people come in with a situation that warrants, you know, use in the front yard, they can go to the Board of Adjustments or whatever methods and prove their hardship and why they should, you know, want to vary from what the ordinance states. But I think we've got to do a broad brush kind of ordinance that, you know, tries to preserve the aesthetic fabric of the town. As I said earlier, we took a and to your point about 25%, that's a fairly generous percentage. We're not denying it. We're just asking that the ordinance allow for it to be in areas that you're not visible from the public right of way. And I think that criteria, correct me if I'm wrong, is the standard by which all the other communities have used.
But that's very different than, what you just said is very different than yours, not visible from the public right of way. Your ordinance says no front
Yeah,
yard.
but then let me finish, because as it discussed earlier, it's going to create walls or barriers. Let's just call it barriers. We don't have to, you know, specific. So that everybody, instead of having these open, and I think Rick or somebody mentioned it, where we have this flowing road to front of house, lawn, very pleasing, very calm, we're gonna have this hedge and walled community, which I don't think any of us want to encourage. I mean, and that's the solution to putting it in the front yard and having it screened. But even so, you'll still see it. I mean, you have a driveway opening,
Right.
you know, so we're taking the position that we're following the footsteps of other communities that have enacted this ordinance or a similar ordinance, and it's gonna be a learning curve. Every ordinance that you pass is a learning curve, but we have to start somewhere. And if we find that it's imposing extreme hardships on citizens, then we'll bring it up for discussion. And we can always update and modify, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, we can revise and upgrade, but we have to have a starting point. And I think, you know, with the aesthetics, the environmental criteria that's on both sides, you know, there are important elements to this that we're not ignoring. I think, as Rick, on behalf of the whole Planning and Zoning Commission, we've discussed this over and over. We went into this completely blind. We reached out for resources and references, and what we've provided here, I think, is a sound document, a balanced, thank you, ordinance to allow the citizens to have some artificial turf in the areas that are dictated in the ordinance right now. And I think it's a good starting point. We're not outlawing it, you know, and I think to the question of property rights, and I said this earlier and I'm more angry and upset completely. You know, everything, we've got sheds, we've got, I can't even keep them, signs, everything that the ordinance, that, how was it, 3.5 inches? 4.5 inches. Everything that you do in this town is regulated somewhat. And it's done for the purpose of upholding the community, the standard of the community. And if people, not everybody, you can't satisfy everybody, but this is, I feel, a good starting point to something that could get out of hand. I've been listening to all this about dictating or mandating one type of turf. That's not going to happen. We live in a competitive world, and people are going to market their products differently. We're going to get checkerboarding if this is allowed to spread. You can't say
What do you mean, checkerboarding house to house?
Yes, I mean, there must be 15 or 20 more colors of green. How are you going to tell a person, well, you can't, or they say, I love that green, but you say, well, it doesn't match Joe Smith next door, which is the intent. You know, that, you're talking about policing, and, you know, I think it's a very difficult situation to say you can only have one manufacturer that unifies all the turf. So anyway, I'll blab on.
I don't think we were saying one manufacturer, we were saying standards, best manufacturing.
Yeah, but it's again, there are many, it'll be a...
Take it away. Take it away now.
You did.
I think
You did a great
I
job.
did a nice job with that, and the same thought was in my mind, is that we hardly have an ordinance in here that relates these things that we don't from time to time update. Brian is often bringing us things that we weren't even aware of with edits, and these are changes that need to be made and why. So I think we've made the best efforts here. We feel like it is a compromise, and if we find that it's not working, then it'll come back to you. But we've got to start somewhere.
Tracy, do you need a decision from us as a collective body so we can move on and talk about sheds and signs and other things?
It's up to you, however you want to handle it, but we will need some sort of consensus at the end of this, whether it's going back for second reading, or if you have points that need to be addressed.
Can we vote it in or out now, or do
No.
we?
No.
No,
We
we
can
not.
decide whether or not it comes back for a second reading or it goes back to y'all. I'm personally saying, I think it can go forward. I think it's a good compromise. I think you all did
So
your
make a
homework
motion.
there. So, do we need to make a
Well,
motion? or what?
no, I think right now, it's based on your decision at the last meeting. It's on the agenda, or will be on the agenda for March for second reading. And I know that there is one change that I pointed out to exactly that needs to be clarified. There's another change, not dealing with synthetic turf at all, but under the Water Efficient Landscape Code that I mentioned it to Corey just a little while ago, dealing with variances that I don't know why there's kind of like an odd sentence in there saying variances may be approved by the commission for anything in the Land Development Code. Doesn't really relate to this, and I don't know why. I'm going to strike that because variances go to the Board of Adjustment. So I just want to point that out. So that'll be the other minor change, but that has nothing to do with the synthetic turf. It's just a cleanup from another section that we happen to be making another little change in there. So those are the only two little minor changes that I plan on having, unless you all give further direction on something to, either make some other changes or give direction that it needs to go somewhere else, and then we'll need to address the second reading in March. We'll need to have something on there then on whether or not, okay, look, we pulled it because it's, or whatever. So I think we're just kind of looking for some direction here on you, from you all, if you want it to still go forward for second reading in March.
Well, I would
Because right now it's on the agenda for
I would
that.
also add the height of the grass. Right now, we're locked in at 1.5 inches. So
Unless the building official otherwise says differently.
then it gets in an argument with.
I hear you, yeah.
Can we make a motion,
We're looking for consensus, right? Whether or not we want it to go
consensus to
forward and
move
be
it
on it.
forward as written to the March, second, third meeting? March 3rd, second?
I mean, it's,
Second,
it,
I think.
yeah.
It's going forward
already-
there
it's already
anyway.
anyway.
Just move
Yeah.
it forward the way
Right.
it is now, and we'll vote on it as second reading in
As
the March
written.
meeting.
With your changes.
Mhm.
That's good with me. I think y'all did
I
it.
don't quite know the consensus there, because if you're against the ordinance and you're okaying it moving forward as is, that's rather a
How is he
strange
against it?
consensus.
You were against
Well,
it.
aren't we voting
I'm
on
not
this or
talking
not?
about
We're not going to
myself.
vote on it to
No.
move?
No, no.
We're just-
No.
we're just
No,
gonna
we're just
reach
talking it out, whether or not it ought to stay on the
Well,
agenda for March.
Okay, well, I say no, but,
Yeah,
Right.
I do too.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
No, we have our direction,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
So it goes forward to the next meeting.
2-minute restroom break?
Sure.
I think Mark's out. Yeah, I think you're out.
Good luck, Mark.
Feel better, sorry.
You haven't been on any cruise ships or?
Well, I was gonna say, that's why you're leaving early. I know that trick.
We're in recess for
Wayne, walk
5
him out.
minutes.
We made it.
Okay, we're moving on to sheds. Who wants to speak on this from P and Z?
Well, I think pursuant to your, what you all had agreed upon, I guess you're going to allow
Oh,
public.
excuse me.
Right. At the very
Public
beginning.
comment, I'm sorry. No,
Where'd
no,
our public go?
no public
No
comment?
sheds?
Rick, you want to take it away?
Neil and Dave are the two most versed on this. One of you want to take a lead?
No sheds, right? Just kidding.
Are you asking me to advocate for the?
Just why,
How it came about?
yes, not a long history.
I think,
Now or not?
I think my introduction to it was public conflict. It
Yeah.
was-
No, if I can, real quick, just how it came about was, there was an issue in town. They pointed out, the way that our current ordinance is set up is that sheds are not allowed in any setback areas. However, and this was pointed out to us by someone that had said that, yes, there are numerous sheds in setbacks, and you haven't cited them, you haven't requested that they be removed. So therefore, either cite them or, you can take a look at your code. And we said, okay, well, we'll take a look at our code. So that's kind of, to be honest with you, how this kind of came about.
And I think so to reduce conflict, I think what we did once again is Wayne and I entertained looking at ordinances actually across the country of how other communities dealt with sheds, and whether that would be appropriate in some modified way to introduce into Ocean Ridge. And so Wayne drafted some criteria, and then I guess it was a couple of meetings ago, we had it in front of the P&Z, and it got modified slightly, and that's what you see in front of you.
And just for the record, this ordinance isn't just about sheds. This is accessory structures, including dune crossovers. I just want to make that clear for the record.
It got expanded. So the issues were location, size, permitting again, and compatibility.
Do we want to open it up to public comment again?
Public
Because
comment.
for the public that didn't really realize that this wasn't
We're
just sheds.
talking about crossovers, dunes, and sheds. Okay.
Here's one.
No, I'm just going to continue. I want to reiterate what Neil was talking about, and I think that as written, this looks good to my eye. There's plenty of compromise involved. It's not going to make warring factions happy, but I think it'll work for us. And those of us that have sheds, we'll probably have to possibly move them around a bit or do something else. But I like what I see here. So I don't know if anybody else looked at it.
So,
I think we had some public comment. Carol?
yeah, Karen. Yes, thank you.
Carol Bessler, 5906 Old Ocean Boulevard. I didn't know that this was included in the crossovers, but I do have a problem with at least one crossover that I know of in town, and I have brought it to Tracy's attention, and I don't know if the commission's been working on it or not, but there is at least one crossover in town that has been separated from a home in Ocean Ridge and is now considered a legal piece of property. And it's a dune property, which means that it could be sold at any time to anybody as a legal piece of our Ocean Ridge dune. That troubles me because as far as I know and as far as my dune goes, it's connected to my home. So I need to be a homeowner in Ocean Ridge that will protect my dune, follow the ordinances, and do everything I'm supposed to do. I don't know if you guys can look into it. I don't know what can be done, but it needs to come to your attention that it may be just one, it may be more, that there are dune properties in this town that are not attached to homes and could be bought and sold by anybody, including people over the bridge in the apartment complexes that may want to have a nice little piece of dune to call their own. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody want to? Ryan, do you want to address?
If I can, Commissioner Bessler called me earlier this morning and kind of informed me of I guess some scenarios that I think we as staff weren't really aware of, where I had primarily was under the impression that crossovers dealt with either one single family home that was around where that crossover was, or a multifamily complex. However, that is not the case. I think there are other groups of single-family homes that may be loosely tied together with an HOA that have dune access, that also have also been permitted to install a crossover by the town. We need to address that part. So we need to, and I spoke with Corey about that this afternoon. So whatever direction you give, just bear in mind that we as staff are going to have to go back and address primarily the dune crossover issue with that in mind. And I wasn't aware of that when that went to P&Z as well. So, chances are, since this has not been scheduled for the town commission or anything, depending on the amount of changes, you may, I'll speak with the town manager, but you may be seeing this again. Well, I don't know if it's going to be separated out, but there's going to be more words to it. To explain the situation and how we're trying to deal with that situation. So we're going to have to kind of put some thought into it because, unfortunately, and I appreciate the, bringing that up to our attention, but it kind of complicates the matter, and so we're going to need to address that.
So are you saying on definition 1.3 dune crossovers, we have one very nebulous broad stroke line that said there shall be no commercial use, leasing, renting, or otherwise allowing the use of a dune crossover by anyone other than the persons occupying the primary dwelling unit. So I echo Carol's concern, if there's no primary dwelling unit attached to it, would this actually be strong enough to cover us from any commercial use or leasing? One of the things that I bring up, and it may or may not, it is an example, over down by the Surf Pocket where there used to be Dog Beach, for those of you who have been there for a long time, there are two public walkways. What has happened is there is a commercial kayaking company that pulls up there every Saturday and every Sunday, unloads 20 kayaks, walks them down their private deeded beach piece to get to the beach, sets up tents for the people who are leasing the kayaks from them, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, that's very much a commercial use of public property or private property. And this is where I'm concerned that this is, to your point, maybe not strong enough, and there needs to be some very clear indication that what we're defining as commercial, and I mean, you can't stop people's property from being sold to other people. So, but what you can stop is how that property is then going to be used within our town, I believe.
What we are impacting here is the actual structure, not the selling of property. We can't, that's right, we can't impact the selling of property. What we can impact, though, is whether or not there is a structure on a piece of property, and then if there is, then we can regulate how those properties need to either be tied together in some manner so that the structure itself relates, especially because the way the code is right now, the code says that, the only way that you could have a structure, a dune crossover, a cross, that is not part of the primary lot, is if that lot has been separated by a public right-of-way, but that it is adjacent to that property. So the issue that we're dealing with, evidently in the past, there have been some crossovers that have gotten permits from us that don't fall into that category.
I understand this is structure related, but still that sentence still stands. There shall be no commercial use. Now, if we're talking about structures, there will be no commercial use of the structure.
Correct.
Leasing of the structure.
Yes.
Renting or otherwise allowing the dune crossover by anybody other than the person occupying the primary dwelling unit. So
Exactly, and we probably
I know
need.
there's two concepts tied in, but those first portions of what can actually happen on that crossover have to be crystal clear, regardless of ownership, regardless of unity of title, regardless of plat.
Yes, and I think what we have to do is.
I mean, because there would be nothing to stop Mrs. Bessler from saying, I'm gonna start to do weddings out on my deck.
Right.
And every Saturday, I'm gonna commercially allow, for the tune of, 20 smackaroos, you come over and you bring everybody you want, and you stand out on my deck, and you get married at this beautiful location, right?
Yes, and that's what we need to take a look at to make sure that we address maybe not just for single-family homes, but for multiple single-family homes. That's where we need to have a little bit of clarification in the, not only the definition, but in the actual body of it, dealing with dune crossovers in the body of that paragraph. Yes, under D, so.
I have two questions from what I'm hearing. One being, you said we can't restrict sales of people's property. Of course we can't, but that dune has always been part of a primary dwelling. Why would we, that's part of the original description. All the dunes are, of some, right? Either of a homeowner association or of a primary dwelling. Why would we ever allow it to be separated off by any?
No.
But Penny,
Well,
we did it.
we
We
have-
did it.
But are we working to not let that
Well,
happen again?
no,
I'm
but,
saying, can't we stop that from ever happening again?
We do
Well, we-
have dune properties that aren't related to another property.
More than one.
Yes.
yes. No, that those may be this is still fluid. Okay, what this is intended to do is to stop it in the future from happening again. We will still have to determine how we want to deal with some of those that are existing. Because the problem is, if we have taken action on those and we've approved it, then that creates a little bit of an issue. Okay, I'd rather not get into, but that's the quandary that we're dealing with.
I understand. My second question then, this is referring to structures. What if the piece of property over there, let's just use mine for instance, I don't have a deck. I have an in-ground crosswalk to be the least obtrusive, right? Let's pretend I don't even have that. So what if that dune frontage has zero structure on it? Are you governing anything here on that piece of property? Or can that piece of property have commercial use on it?
No, that piece of property cannot have, and when you say commercial use or something, we're saying that, no, it can't have a commercial use to it, but I'm not so sure that that would be governed by this section, because this section governs structures. I think there are probably other sections of the code.
I think what you're maybe hearing is we need a separate ordinance or some type of something.
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ocean Ridge has already regulations that there's no commercial allowed in Ocean Ridge.
That's what I'm saying. I think there are other regulations that we already have in place that would not allow, let's say that you have no structure, but you want to allow the person with the kayaks to say, yeah, show up, and you just park along park along the street and carry them.
It's probably a violation of your zoning regulations. because
Right.
it only
Exactly.
allows a single-family home.
That's what we
Right.
want to hear.
Yeah.
Right.
What's happened if they got credit for part of the dune as to FAR and stuff like that on
Exactly.
a house that's
Right.
already there? Are you looking at that?
Well, we aren't messing with that. That is staying the
That's already
same,
in
and
the
we
code.
aren't messing with that at all. That
Right.
doesn't have
No, then they
anything
sell off the dune parcel that
that qualified for the FAR, and then that's my question. I've had that conversation with Mr. Cameron here to say, why, in the past, it appears that maybe, I'm not sure that if we've obtained, say, all the unity of titles that we should have obtained to tie those two pieces of property together from a zoning perspective. That's what we need to do, and that's what we will be doing in the future. However, I can't speak for the way things were done kind of in the past, if they used some of those calculations for FAR, but they were not tied together with a unity of title, because people don't come to us to say, I'm selling a piece of property.
So Brian, do you have, or do we have as a town, the ordinances on the book that would prohibit and/or require unity of title, particularly on single-family homes that also have a dune parcel? Are we covered that way? Because I keep hearing a little bit yes, a little bit no.
I think I have,
Which
and
is complete lawyer talk, you know that, right?
Didn't we address it in the CCCL ordinance?
we did,
Brian?
I knew we addressed it somewhere.
Yes.
It's coming for, yes, it's, you've got,
No, but I totally get what Penny and Christine
Oh,
are saying.
yes.
That's a very strong issue. We should have it separate. It shouldn't be buried in some CCL.
well, it's not buried there, but that's where it belongs, because it's dealing with things that are dune-related and east of the CCCL line.
And not just an accessory structure. which this
Right,
is.
and that's why it's all-encompassing. That's why we put it there. And you'll be seeing that one, well, actually, did that one already come forward, or?
Yes.
Yeah, it had a first
Okay.
reading.
Oh, okay,
I think it
all
was
right.
first reading.
It's going for
It-
second
it-
reading
it-
March
Okay.
So
2nd.
all construction
So
east
that
of the
answers
CC.
the question that was asked? Yes, we're strongly, no one can sneak commercially.
I want to
In-
go one step further. If you are a private, single-family homeowner, you cannot separate your dune from your property.
I'm not that
You're
person,
correct.
and I totally agree with that.
Well, does Palm Beach County control Ocean Ridge in the sense that if Palm Beach County has a rule that Ocean Ridge has to live? with,
No,
it
they
doesn't
only have
trump it?
certain rules that preempt our rules or that apply countywide.
Okay, because what I was gonna say is what happened with Palm Beach, because I owned a place in County Pocket, I knocked a dilapidated house down, but my garage was good. I tried to keep it, and they said I had to get rid of my garage because unless you have a house on that piece of property, you can't put a structure on that. Therefore, those if there's any decks out there, any kind of structure, they're not really allowed once you divorce that property from the residents, because you don't have it connected.
I hear you, the only problem is that there may be two PC numbers. There is no, and if there's no unity of title that's been developed in the past, then.
Oh, no, there was a unity of title. The resident house, they paid the real estate taxes on the whole unit. And then they started cutting it off, because if you look in Zillow, somebody's selling a dune for what, 47,000 or something? I sent it over to you, you remember that? So somebody's actually selling a
In
dune.
Ocean Ridge?
Yeah, in Ocean Ridge. Yeah, just if you type in Zillow.
So back to what Penny and Christine are saying, you believe the CCL and all this. I think at the March meeting, we
Well-
need to come with a piece of paper, Brian, say, this is why they can't do it, it's clearly presented in this, and if it's not clearly presented in that document, then we create one.
Well, that's right, then we need to make changes to that ordinance. Yes, I hear what you're saying.
So, and I have a question that involves a specific home in town, which I think I mentioned to you before. The gentleman has a house, and he is not across the road from Old Ocean onto his dune, and it's a unity of title situation. So in other words, his house is it's the second house on Old Ocean, to the west. So there's a house in front of him, then his dune is on the other side of Old Ocean.
He's not alone, right? The one
There
that-
we have a couple of
Yeah, we have
cases
few of
like
those.
that. I don't know how they got permits,
He hasn't
but,
installed his deck yet.
Yeah, he doesn't have.
okay, it's vacant.
Yeah,
Okay.
so he could install a deck
No,
on it.
no, he could not, because he doesn't meet our definition of being able to install an accessory structure. He can't do it.
Wow.
And he never could be able to do it. I mean, that's the thing. We aren't changing something to, once again, it's not taking away somebody's rights, so.
Right, but what Penny's bringing up, the house that is in the identical situation, except he already built his deck, what, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somehow or other that
And
troubles me.
And I know that square footage was used for FAR, because that house is built to the rivets.
And when they do that,
You know
they,
Kumar's house?
Yeah.
Right.
that they should have a unity of title.
Yeah,
So-
but he doesn't have a structure on it, and what Brian's saying is he won't be allowed.
What's to tie it
See,
together.
that's not right.
And you're talking about personal property rights, remember?
Anyway, I don't think that's right. That's correct. To penalize, just because the guy hasn't built his deck yet, he gets penalized because we institute a.
Well, once again, we are not changing the code. The code has always been in there. We have just in the past, for lack of a better thing, maybe not looked at our code as closely as we should have, and those things occurred. So we aren't changing our code.
This is what we
If
had.
he's allowed to build a structure, we are going to demand a unity of title for that parcel, and then he can build the structure.
No, because if he is not directly across from it, he's not allowed to do it. That's what the code says now. We aren't changing that part of the code.
Right, that's nothing new.
Yeah.
But if we were to change that piece of the code, because I'm actually listening to what you're saying, then yes, there has to be requirements. You have to have unity of title, in perpetuity, it can never be divided, whatever.
The town will be
I think
facing
he
this
should be
within a
able
year.
to build the structure, but I don't want him to sell it separately.
Yeah, it says you have to have the unity of title first.
Yeah, chicken or the egg. Unity of title has to come before the permit. It is a condition of the permit.
But Brian, what's the problem with the person living near it and having unity of title and now doing it in the future? Why are we against the decks? 'Cause we allow decks every 50 feet, I think, if you're over 50 feet.
Yeah, I'm not against anything. I'm just saying that's what the code says.
Oh, yes, you
I could care, no offense, I could care less what you all want to do. That's why we're having it. Just give us direction. We'll do whatever you want to do. That's right. Yeah, it's right. I mean, if you want to allow that to occur, I'm sure me and Tracy and Wayne and Corey would be happy to say, yeah, here you go. You know, so it's what you all want to do.
People can't.
As long as it's a unity of title, and if they are unfortunate enough to not live directly across Old Ocean, and they have one house removed, I would think they'd be allowed to build a structure.
Okay, so
But
we have
our
to pay
consultants
taxes.
say you can't.
So
Well, the
it,
proposed code.
No, the existing
No
code.
existing code, absolutely.
So everyone was doing a
We're not even
whoop
doing it.
without
This has been there.
anyone looking at the codes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, this has already been there. Just people were looking the other way for a little while,
okay, so
Right.
is it cleared up, if that is consensus, could we make that change to, is it in this ordinance that we can make that change to it?
Well, I think what we'll need to do is we will need to really look at and I'm looking at Corey too and Wayne, that we will need to really look at the unity of title issue because that is very determinative of what is, you know, what can be allowed and what is tied together, and we may put it in 3 or 4 places. Okay, so, but if we get direction, if you want to allow someone.
By March 3rd.
No. It's, no.
But I think that's the direction you're getting.
Yeah,
I think
but,
that's the direction.
okay, but I mean, if you all want to allow, and I guess
What's
that
the law of unintended consequences that could happen? Because you always think of the negative, so bring it on.
Thank you.
okay, because if you don't, I guess the thing about it is going to be very difficult. If you want to allow that to occur, it's kind of like, where do you cut it off? How far out do you
Away
want
from
to allow,
property.
that's right. How far away from the dune do you want to allow someone to own property and then tie the 2 properties together? Because do you want to just say located in the town of Ocean Ridge? Or do you want, you know, because there can be, the problem in saying that is that there can be some unintended consequences that I can't think of right now that may occur.
Right.
Okay, and that's probably why the code was written the way it was that the only reason that that could occur is if a public right-of-way split the property, and then if it was directly across from it, you could do it.
So you're saying specifically those properties that it's already happened to, because in the future, if we have a unity of title requirement before any permits issued for anything, it's null and void. But for those properties that exist now, where someone is remote from them, even if they're a primary resident, one house removed, or they don't have a primary residence, that's what the current ordinance does?
No, the current ordinance prevents that from happening on top of saying you've got to have a unity of title as well. So we're going to have a unity of title anyway. I mean, that's a requirement for using FAR or using anything else. We've got to tie these properties together because otherwise they could get sold off, nobody notifies us, but we do the unity of title, we record it, they have to come to us to have it released. So, and then I'm assuming in most cases we're going to say no, unless because it's dealing with the FAR or something else. So, you know, so that's what the current ordinance says. Now, if you want to kind of modify that to kind of try to accommodate what appears to have happened in the past, where people who are not exactly, who don't fall into that category of directly across from the dune, but they were allowed to build an accessory structure.
But that's grandfathered in anyways.
Those are, yes.
So I guess my question is, and you will come up with the law of unintended consequences, I have full faith in that, Brian. But, I mean, how many houses are we talking about? Are we talking about, there's,
I only know one.
Well, no, you've got some vacant parcels across there that are, you know, that you could, that I think, Wayne, are probably big enough to have dune
They're
crossovers.
adjacent, so to speak.
Yeah,
You mean like the one you're discussing, which is one house west or not directly across Old Ocean?
That's the only one
Those
I
are the
know.
ones you're
but I mean,
discussing.
nobody on Sable Island owns a dune. So, I mean, that's what
So
I'm trying,
far.
so far.
Dude.
But that's what I'm trying to ascertain. Is this a big problem? Is this a little problem? I mean,
I think it's tiny.
I mean,
Maybe one house that's
We could say that property, maybe if we take away the part that it's split, that is immediately adjacent, but say, I don't know, and once again, I don't want to say I'm just making up a number here, but the property lines are within 500 feet of each other, something like that, or 300 feet.
reasonable, right.
I mean, that's where I'm sure that Wayne and Corey can work out something definitive and, come up with some number, but I don't know if that's what you all want to, the road you want to go down, because it does appear that there are probably some instances of where, that does, someone who owns, I think I pointed out to Tracy, there was one or two that I think that where they appeared to own part of the dune, but their property was not adjacent to the dune. So under the current code, even as it exists, not only in the new code, but the current code, they wouldn't be allowed to put an accessory structure there.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got anything? All right, I just want to zip through the actual ordinance real quick. Minimum side interior setback shall be 3 feet, minimum rear setback shall be 5. Any particular reason for 3 and 5 versus 3 and 3?
The perviousness was set at 5 feet. Previous ordinances that we've got, we were working with 3 feet, which gave the ability to provide for landscaping. So that was it in terms of getting substantial screening.
2B,
2B.
section 64,
Okay.
61, 2B. So I'm still lost. So 3 feet for landscaping, 5 feet for,
And 5 feet with a buffer,
in
the
other words,
rear.
any reason it shouldn't be 3, 3, both of them.
We're just trying to stay consistent with the previous ordinance that made reference to the 5. That was where that came from.
Five's the standard, and we gave a break
On the
side
side.
yards.
Yes, okay.
Because side yards are tight.
That answers my question, thank you. Okay,
Rick.
some of these sheds, the smaller ones, I don't see anything about anchoring. Isn't it like imperative that all these?
That's what I've got is my comment on item E, is to add anchoring.
Am I on E?
That's
Yeah, I am on E, that's exactly where I am.
That's good.
Okay,
That's needed.
and then down on 4D.
Well, if I can, on that 2E, on the anchoring, I guess, is that it?
You do, but it doesn't apply to all sheds, Penny.
Do
No.
it for the bigger sheds, not for the smaller.
Oh, okay, and I don't know if Wayne wants to chime in here. Right, yes, and I hear you,
was a reason,
but
though, I think.
I think there was a reason that I guess, Wayne, if you want to kind of, the discussion I had with Wayne on that was, okay, it's not like we can just say, well, it's kind of quasi-anchoring. It's either there's anchoring or there's not anchoring, and if there's anchoring, then I guess an engineer has to determine it's anchored properly.
The anchoring and meeting the wind loads have to be determined. And when you have a building permit, the assumption is, if I have a permit for something, then it was an item that was approved and meet current code from the building code as well as the town ordinances. Because we were trying to give an allotment for these sheds, Rubbermaids, the throwaways, you can put anchoring as per manufacturer specs. That'll be fine. But
It just scares me to
doesn't,
think
it
of
doesn't,
hurricanes
and
coming
I
into
agree with you.
sheds that's-
It picks up in the wind, it goes flying.
Between 25 and
Yeah.
100 is way too much latitude for
Yeah.
building.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll address that?
Manufactured specs.
As per manufacturer specs.
Okay. This is on the 4D. The second to last sentence, other dwelling units. What exactly is the definition of an other dwelling unit? Is it a house or a condo or an apartment?
Well, it's just a dwelling unit is anything. It could be single-family, multifamily, it could be anything.
Fine.
But this is part of the stuff that we're going to have to modify and clarify.
Okay, and then.
Yeah,
now-
because just on that, I'm not comfortable with existing written instrument. It's.
I know, we're,
Okay.
yes, we're going to need to modify,
Okay, so,
yeah.
you good, Chrissy? So I'm moving down 64, 44. D1, I think it is, yeah, C1. No more than 50% of any wall, fence, or hedge measured linearly will be within 18 inches from the public right of way. So what about a seawall? Is the top of the seawall the 18 inches, or is it 18 inches from the landowner's side of the seawall?
Well, a seawall is not a wall, fence, or hedge,
No, I know.
in accordance with this.
Let's say I want a landscape right up to my seawall.
Okay,
Can I, or do I have to be 18 inches away from my seawall?
well, right now, because of the change in, if you look back at the definition part of it where we talked about yard front, look on the second page, where we struck out that yard front, where we struck out that part that it is, the front yard is also a yard that abuts a waterway. So by striking that out, what we have impacted then is, because in a yard front, in a front yard, you can only have a 4-foot-high fence or hedge or something like that. However, by making this the rear yard, not the front yard, you can have a hedge across the back, have within 6 feet, or is there any, I don't even know if there's any heights for hedges that we have here in the town.
No, I'm talking wall, close to the wall. I wouldn't want to waste 18 inches and plant my hedge away from the wall.
Yeah, but isn't, in Ocean Ridge, isn't the property line go past your wall? It did in,
That's what I'm
at
asking.
another house I owned, it went past into the ICW.
Sometimes it does,
But, cause you had to
sometimes
put a dock up,
unfortunately
you
it
had to put
doesn't.
like 5 feet, so your pin was actually in your wall, but it meant go another 5 feet you own over the water. But I don't know if that's all the houses in Ocean
I
Ridge.
wish
They're
it
on water.
were.
Yeah. Same.
Right now, I wish
Yeah, I
it
guess
would.
you're right.
If you have a boat lift, the pilings extend out into the canal.
It doesn't mean that you own that water.
Right.
You have to permit to have.
Right. Permit does not equal permission.
You
may be leasing
Yeah.
that from the state.
Yeah,
And I
unfortunately,
think you
that's
can just
something.
put it in your thought process. I don't think anyone cares if somebody puts a hedge up against the seawall, it keeps it 18 inches away from the sea,
Okay.
right? Okay, and block walls, this is 2F. So if you drive around town, there actually are quite a few concrete walls, not quite a few, several, that are not stuccoed. So how does it affect their life?
Let me see, where are you
Yeah.
talking about?
F.
Section 4F.
Is that existing language?
That's existing, it's not new.
language. Yeah.
That's existing?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Anything that's not
Anything that
totally
doesn't have an
ignored.
underline is existing.
Right.
Okay, that's it, that's all I
already
got.
here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So-
Nothing new there.
So I had a question on section 3, backing up a little bit, section 64-41. We've got A, B, and then we go down to B4. In the event an accessory structure is allowed on a lot divided by the right-of-way, a unity of title should be required, okay? In a form acceptable to the town prior to the issuance of any permits for construction of the accessory structure. So, are we saying the accessory structure could either be a shed and/or a crossover?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
it could be anything.
There might be your language.
I mean, that's
Start
some of
working
it
on
there,
that
but I
part
think
of
we
it,
have it in
right?
some other places too, and we may need to put it in, based on the way the conversation is going tonight, we probably need to
but
clarify.
I just want to make sure this doesn't mean that you can have a shed on your dune. Aha.
As long as you can't see it.
It's gotta be behind a hedge.
I
Yeah.
don't think it does, I mean, we aren't modifying that requirement, so if we weren't able to put them over there before, I don't think we're able to put them there now, but I'll have to get with Wayne on that. And it appears the direction is we want to make sure that,
Nothing-
I just
no
want to
structure.
make sure that there's no loopholes because we've got people that are loop experts.
We
okay.
can live in the shed.
You could live in the shed.
Well, I mean, you could use it as.
Let's not close that.
Said no domicile.
Okay, so,
Yeah, I just got.
Oh, I think,
You
Wayne,
wanna say
I just gotta make one quick comment, on 64-44, item C. And we're talking about halfway down into that paragraph where it says walls and fences located in rear or side shall not exceed 6 feet. I want to just add the word columns to that if nobody had any objection to that. So it's walls, columns, and fences. Okay.
So this is, we're all set with this. There's some fixes coming, and everybody's happy.
You know what, I have a question too now. Reading just above, it talks about tennis and it says, shall be constructed of material allowing no less than 50% light and 50% air circulation. No less than or at least? I'm not sure I understood why no less than.
I think it means it has to be at least 50%.
Yes, 50% light, 50% air.
So at least.
Shall be constructed of material allowing.
So that doesn't become a structure.
Okay, no less than is the same as at least?
Yes. A planner probably wrote that. If an attorney had wrote it, it would probably be. Yeah. Okay.
We haven't even
So we're
gotten
good
to
on that, right? We're all set on number 2?
So I just have to ask, and you can tell me you can't answer it. Will this take care of some of the ongoing litigation that has been happening in the town
No.
forever? Great.
Okay.
I just had to ask.
Moving on to signs.
Matter of fact, it's
Hopefully
growing.
wrap up. So that is in the package. It's number 2. I guess, Brian?
Yes, this, the sign code, now it's been a while since it's been in front of planning and zoning. And we thought that since you all didn't have enough controversial items on the agenda tonight, we would just throw in this one as well. But I think I have discussed this with, I know with the P&Z members and with you all as well, that, you know, back in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court came out with a decision that kind of invalidated the majority of sign codes in most municipalities in the country. And so periodically, municipalities have been changing them, modifying them. And once again, this primarily deals with temporary signs, not permanent signs, but temporary signs. Because the Supreme Court said, and probably rightfully so, that whether you call it a directional sign, a real estate sign, a political sign, it's all content-based, so therefore they all have to be treated the same. And the last go-around that we had with P&Z, where the key, I think the key language in this is on, let me find it here, is on page, okay, here we go. It's on page 16 of 19 and 17 of 19, where we talk about the number of signs that are allowed on private property. And, you know, these are the numbers that came out of the, and it's been some time, that came out of the last P&Z meeting, where you can have like it's a chart. Where you can have like the maximum number of signs per parcel is 3, the maximum sign area per sign is 3 square feet. Sign height can't be higher than 5 feet. And then the number of temporary commercial signs per parcel shall be no more than 2, and that is like if you have a contractor, an architect, or somebody like that who puts up their sign saying, hey, the pool developed by so-and-so. So that's where I think most, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's where most of the discussion occurred with P&Z as far as getting direction from them. And then as far as the minimum or the sign setback for the ground signs, they can be placed right on the property line, but they have to be at least 5 feet from another temporary sign. And so, I mean, that is once again, that is kind of the biggest change that you would see. So if you were to discuss this or want to discuss this further, or say go forward with something like this, all of the little real estate signs that you have out there, and Tracy, I don't know, do you have the, because that would be, okay, so that's currently the size that we have for a real estate sign, but the problem also is that size, since we say it applies to real estate signs, it's it's not content neutral because we call it out as a real estate sign.
So this would be the size of your real estate signs, and then this would also be the size of your election signs?
Today.
Yes. If,
Well,
no, sorry.
No.
If we changed the code and you went with this size, it would,
And the
For everything.
concern that I would have with a size like that is that, you know, people also have free speech rights and they have to be allowed to have signs that are large enough to accommodate those rights. So that size might be a little small on that. And I think that's too
This
big
is
though.
the s- no, this is the
That's 3
3.
square feet? Oh, okay.
this is what's in the ordinance proposed.
Okay.
3 square feet.
Is
So
that
this
the
would be the
average
size of your
campaign
real
sign?
estate signs.
May I clarify one thing here? It's been a year almost since we
Yes.
discussed this, and it was kind of tabled because there was large disagreement among P and Z as to what to do. We kind of,
Correct.
what we wanted is the things to be the way it is, and Brian, from legal perspective, pushed us, and I think it kind of got stuck at that point.
Too big?
And
Oh, the big
for
and I
real
think
estate.
the answer is today, we're not enforcing sign ordinances. at
Correct.
all. Is that
So-
correct?
So the fear
So
is,
that's the problem, is we're
Yes.
not enforcing, and I can name on one street, on my street, there's a home under construction. I've never seen this before, but 2 signs popped up from the mortgage lender on the property.
In that
And-
corner.
and they're about 3 square foot signs, maybe a little less, but they're kind of about the size of your normal candidate sign, but.
One
so
blew
we're not-
one blew over
And
the
I
other day.
started to call code enforcement, and I said, I know, we're not enforcing
We're not
anything."
enforcing it, right?
So I just got to sneak by there at night and pull
so, one thing Brian mentioned, the reason why we don't, that Brian doesn't recommend going down the path, just let's close our eyes and not get into this, is because let's say we get person X moves into town.
Yes.
And he wants to put up a 10 by 3 foot sign.
Yes.
You know, we can't, that's what we're trying to stop here.
This is my particular, and Brian's heard this before, but I don't want to say it again, and I'll disclose, I'm a licensed real estate broker, so I'm sympathetic to real estate people. However, I really like the small signs for our town for this reason, is that we have expensive homes. Those homes often are on the market for 6 months to 18 months before they sell. And to have a 3-foot sign, I've got 2, one across the street and 2 doors down that have been on the market at least 18 months. And I'd hate to, according to this ordinance, they could put up 3 signs on that property at 3 square feet. And it's gonna look like
Yeah, totally.
somebody's yard sale or a flea market. And
So, just so we're all on the same page from a size standpoint, 3 foot by 1 foot, right, is 432 inches. The one that Tracy held up, the large one, is 24 by 18. That's also 432 inches. If we go to a two times 1, that's 288. I just think even a 2 times 1 is too
This is
too
2
large.
square, and this is
That's
1
still-
square.
Now, would that also cover open house signs with the arrow pointing them down? And I mean, that's a temporary sign.
Yes, it
Those are
does.
true temporary signs, and I don't get caught up on that kind of, you know, for an afternoon or for the time of an election or any of that. Did we ever define what temporary is?
It's all of
All of
those
those.
signs.
All of
Yeah,
those.
It's
signs.
anything,
Yeah,
that's
but-
right.
But a
Yes.
real estate sign that's up for, you know, a minimum of 30 days and sometimes 18 months.
And now you have your,
That's
now
gonna
you have your
clutter our town.
contractor who's working on a house for
And the
24
mortgage
months.
people, and the mortgage
They
lender.
Mortgage
want to
broker.
put their sign up.
The house beside me has literally been for sale since John Wooten sold it. Because the woman that bought it never moved in, renovated, put it on the market. Gentleman that bought it, renovated it, it's on the market the whole time. There has been a real estate sign out there for 3 years, 3.5 years.
So the little real estate signs are pretty nice. If we could find a way of defining, you know, anything, a timeline of what's temporary, that they would fall outside.
Yeah, but couldn't you do it like a daily sign, a temporary sign? It's more than 1 day? Because like pointing to a house on an open house, that's a day sign. So why Why couldn't that be 3 feet or whatever you wanted
And
to?
don't we already permit something? Because I know on the real estate signs, it has a little, they have
Yeah.
little tags on them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
so we permit them,
Actually,
yes.
actually get refunded. But I have a question, a legal question concerning Steve, Christine, and Dawn. If Steve's wife's a realtor, Christine is a agent, right, real estate agent,
Mm-hmm.
and Don's selling his house, where do we stand on any kind of vote on this issue?
No, it's not, because this
No?
impacts town-wide. It's
No
not
conflict
just,
of
no,
interest?
no.
Okay, good.
It's not, you know, no. Well, no.
If we don't
Well,
say what it's
the-
for,
no, but
then
the-
we're not prejudiced.
No, but the problem is that how do you differentiate the size of signs? Because the minute you say, we can have one size for real estate signs and one size for all other signs.
I'm
Okay.
saying, what if you had one small, 1 2-foot, first come, first served? But when somebody drives by, looks at the property, can't have 2 2s, can't have a 1 and a 3. It can only have a small and a whatever, and you, for whatever the purpose is.
I mean, I guess we could have something where you can have, you know, the size of the signs that you can have. You can have one size that's 1 square foot. You can have another size that's 2 square foot, or 2 sizes that.
You might be
that are
onto
2.
something, because I think what we're trying to say is preemptively, and there was somebody who was selling their house down off of Midling, that whole little area, and they had put up in their backyard a huge banner. I mean, it was like a 5-foot by 10-foot banner, so everybody on a boat going down the intercoastal could see that their house was for sale.
Right.
And of course, I was like, you know, I come over the bridge and I'm like, whoa, what's that? So I think preemptively, going back to the root of what we're trying to do, I don't think we're necessarily trying to comply with the 2015 court ruling. What we're trying as a town to do is preemptively say, we want a maximum size of any sign, right? Am I in
Yes,
the right
totally.
direction?
The answer to the question about a time.
Temporary.
Differentiating based on time though, making
What's temporary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
temporary time, so
If you're gonna use the sign for more than 6 months, you have to use this one. If you use it for,
for more than 3 months.
yeah,
Well, no, but,
That's what I'm saying.
but doesn't that
that's another way to
contradict,
skin the cat.
that contradicts the entire conversation I had with you, Brian? Because now you're content orienting it.
Well,
No?
no, let's say that if a sign is going to extend, regardless of the sign, whether it's free speech, whether it's, you know, whether it's a real estate sign or whether it's a sign from your contractor, if signs are up for more than 6 months, they can only be, say, this big. If signs are up for, say, not to exceed a month, they can be this big. I think, is that what you're going after?
Yeah.
What happens,
I love that.
Re-up?
Well,
they probably can, yes, that's the whole
Then
thing.
they would have to pay a new permit fee?
Well, we can't, we don't charge.
what's the deal
You don't
though
charge
if you?
for the real estate fee.
We
You
don't,
just said you did. We do.
What?
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you charge for the real estate fees.
well, under the new sign code, we probably would not be doing that because that's.
Because we can't differentiate
There
between
you
real
go.
estate
That's
and
right.
election.
The sign code that we put in place here is gonna be different in Gulfstream and it'll be different in Manalapan. And so, I mean, the realtors are gonna, or whomever, are gonna have, ultimately, if the rest of the towns follow suit, and there's how many, 400 and some cities in the state of Florida that could
Gulfstream already has one. Most municipalities already have one. Gulfstream had one because of Marty O'Boyle. He started putting up really vulgar signs,
Yeah.
and they got bigger and bigger, and then he started flying banners overhead.
Yeah, I
So
know, they
signs
flew
have-
one over
yeah.
my law firm, but.
Yeah.
But so, that's, I mean, it's sort of like that home rule issue. I mean, they said that you need to establish the size of, the size of the signs, but they didn't standardize it across.
No, that's up to us.
You're gonna have each municipality may have different definitions.
Right, but the thing that you have to keep in mind too is that you have to allow for free speech. So if someone wants to put a sign in their front yard that says, you know, I hate the president, I love the president, whatever, if they want to put that in there, then we can't dictate that, you know, then the question could become, okay, if we only allow a sign to be this big, is that big enough to accommodate their free speech rights? And I've seen, well, there might be some district courts of appeal that disagree with you, but,
They've got it on the internet, one of how many characters that you can,
Yeah.
you know.
So you use 12-point size, you use 2-point size. I just don't think that this code is ready for prime time. I like the idea of the different sizes basis on the time, because it gives us a time restriction.
Right.
But I would never be in support of 3 signs per parcel would be allowed. I mean, it's just, I don't even know where that came from.
Did you just say that Gulfstream has a new sign code?
Uh-huh. They've had it for about 3 years.
What is it?
Yeah.
It
Can we
is,
see it?
well, I don't quite have it in
It's
my
a real
purse.
estate sizing.
No, but I'm just saying, we keep talking about not reinventing the wheel.
Oh,
and-
absolutely. Yeah, it is, I believe it is a 2x4. If you look at them, they're
Oh, they're
almost,
long.
they're long.
Right, they're
Yeah.
horizontal.
They're very large.
What's Palm Beach doing? Because they have, maybe not quite as small as us, but contractors, realtors, they're all on a relatively small sign.
So we'll look, so at some point, I'm presuming that, yeah, I mean,
Check
best,
our options.
like you said, best practices, no need to reinvent. Carol, I think, had a
Yeah,
good.
Carol's
Yes,
trying to
Carol,
talk. We
keep
didn't,
missing
we
it.
didn't give public their chance.
Yeah, you have your
Is that-
gardens, your, the garden
Yep.
signs that we just had.
And that's what I'm.
There she goes.
Carol Bessler, New Hat, Vice President, Ocean Ridge Garden Club, 5906 Old Ocean. What I read in the new underlining in the ordinance, and please clarify if I'm wrong, is that our garden club, that we usually do our events in conjunction with the town of Ocean Ridge, would be grandfathered or exempted or under different rules and regulations for the signs that we put up, which are, I'm sure you've seen the gala sign we've had up and the pet pictures with Santa. That really is our only way of advertising and letting the community know of things that we're doing in the community. We certainly don't have any problems with you putting restrictions on it in terms of time or how many we're allowed to put up. But our sign, as you've probably seen, is bigger than the one that Tracy held up. And we think that that's a good visible sign without being too intrusive on the aesthetics of the town. So please keep that in consideration when you're revamping your ordinance. Thank you.
That would work with the temporary is larger than the,
Yeah, like
Yeah,
the town.
the
Clever.
semi-permanent one.
Up to 30 days, up to 90
So-
days.
And
Since
as far as the garden club signs go now, those were brought in front of the town commission and that was approved as a special, specific event.
But if we put the
For the
sign
town.
ordinance in place, does the town commission still have that ability?
Yeah, it's in here.
Yeah.
It's on page 17.
Under
Page
E.
17.
Yeah,
Yeah.
under E, yep.
Okay, town manager, okay, fine. All right, so Neil's idea is very clever. So what should we do? Ask Brian to think it through, investigate it, and get back to us?
Well, I mean, I think that the new sign code would based on your discussion here, it would probably go back in front of P and Z for their review and comment and direction, is what I'm thinking, because it's been quite a while since they've looked at it, and I think, I think Mr. Carey was correct in, well, yeah, this is kind of where we left it, but it wasn't clear direction at that time. So it seems like, I think we have a little bit clearer direction on what to see if we can somehow mirror the size of the longer the sign is up there, the smaller it needs to be.
And what would be the maximum size that everyone would allow?
For the,
And what would be the maximum
Temporary?
number that you
Right,
could
right.
have on a parcel?
for the temporary versus the pseudo.
Correct, the largest.
pseudo-permanent one, right?
When we were talking about the amount of signs you could have, we were talking about, well, during election season, you may have an election sign while.
Let's say if you're
you-
selling your house.
Right, while you may have a real estate sign or a construction sign, and those were the
And
three.
then a
Or
free speech sign, and so that's where we kind of came up with.
So can we say varying temp?
Well, it does, but that counts
But they can go back
toward
and
the
work on
limit.
this, right? We put it back
Yeah.
in, it goes
Right.
back into their lap with
Figure it out.
the ideas and,
Yeah.
so you guys work on it again and they have direction.
No, but we're just trying to give them a little direction
Yeah.
on size. We definitely don't want anything bigger than
I think they know that, right?
432 inches. current campaign size.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I don't think so.
Figure it out.
What size do you guys like the most?
Yeah, I mean,
If I had to,
You asked.
if I had to
this
go.
is two, this is one
If I
square.
had to choose one, I'd go to the 1 foot square,
Yeah, me
which
too.
would crush,
That can't be
the outside.
It looks rectangular, but maybe it's just still.
Well, it's not square.
Yeah,
Oh, it's longer,
the
it's
other
foot,
question
right.
is, on the
Actually,
1 foot
we have a-
square sign, can you,
Well, you have 11 by 14 though, when you run it.
can you turn it?
11 by 14,
Yeah, it's not a square, but that's the area.
square foot area,
Can you turn
square
it?
foot area.
Can you put it this way? Can you put it vertically?
Yeah.
I mean, you got it this way. I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether you,
No?
as long as you stay within that size.
Right.
As a starting point for a campaign signs are bigger.
Campaign signs are 3.
Yeah, I think
That's a size, that's a pretty good size, yeah.
Yeah, but how long do we keep the campaign signs up? Like, because we can only put up a certain time, right? And then,
This is 2, this is 3, this is 2. This is 1.
Yeah, there are, but that's okay.
And what was the smaller one, Tracy? What's smaller than the one? What is our
This is our
current?
Yeah, they
Real
don't look
estate.
exactly right.
That's right.
Real
Yeah.
estate.
Close
The
enough.
signs aren't that big, really.
We're not voting on it.
Whatever ruler you're using was oversized or something.
I didn't use it, it wasn't me.
That's right. You're off the hook.
It wasn't me.
No, I don't
By the time
measure.
they get
By
there, they'll
11.
be figured out.
Okay, so they're looking.
11, she has
We
11
wanna
by
say,
14,
let's
that's a square
start
foot.
at 432, in other words, 3 times 1 area,
Nothing bigger than that, and see
nothing
what
bigger
they
than
come up
that.
with that.
And then, and I think, does everyone agree with me? We prefer to reduce it if possible,
I would.
the size.
I would have, I like your idea of having different sizes for different amounts of time.
Times, exactly right.
Kind of, kind of regulates, and,
What'd you say?
yeah,
I like the 40 inches for everything.
Yeah, that's pretty good, but that'd be hard to,
We've just gotta work on this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, there's. You're gonna get killed
yeah.
legally.
We like it, but it ain't happening.
Let that size sign. You're just gonna get killed.
What?
I know.
We don't need, a little sign would be.
Personal preference.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, that and
Right.
limiting the number, because 3, no offense, 3 is pretty minimal when it comes to that. Most other sign codes, and I haven't looked at Gulfstreams or Palm Beaches, but a lot of other ones, they allow a lot more, they allow more than 3, so.
but I mean, I would like to see the look at best practices for surrounding neighborhoods, yes?
Yeah, we might get some ideas.
Yes.
Okay, are we all set
Okay.
then? You guys know what
Got
you're
it.
doing on the signs?
Okay.
Now we have open discussion / commissioner comments, which are necessary.
Can I say something?
Yes,
Say it.
Thank you.
thank you.
That's what these workshops are so good for. We can actually talk and communicate and get guidance.
Well, you guys gave us a ton of
Whoever
guidance.
thought of this was really that much appreciated.
It's a great
Oh, the,
It's great.
Did you read the whole thing?
I went through a lot of it.
It's an excellent guide for planting.
My paper this morning.
What, the, native flora?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
okay, we're adjourned.
Was there any other commissioner
Yeah,
comments
I did.
or?
I did want to say something, is that I was asking when I first came on the dais about doing a workshop for just this reason, so we could actually speak amongst each other. And one of the things I heard the whole time I was campaigning, and basically the whole time I've been living around here, is how do we protect and preserve our little slice of heaven? So through these discussions, and I hope we could maybe have a couple of years, through these discussions, that's where we could spitball. We don't have to necessarily come up with the answer or what we're gonna do or be ready to vote on the next time, but we can spitball what we hear from residents, what we're thinking amongst ourselves. How do we protect and preserve our place? Which I know is what y'all were saying when you were pretty on the defensive there about where you were coming from. But we could do all that together. So I hope we can, next workshop, I hope we can come with fresh ideas and just kind of go forward.
Anybody else? Okay, meeting adjourned. Reese, did you call?